Chapter 2101. The slogan that Anton shouted before he died was heroic and indignant. The elven slaves who had been imprisoned for 100 years saw Joe's body hanging on the railing for days. Their pent-up anger was finally unleashed at this moment. The strong slaves broke open the wooden door, and the angry slaves swarmed out. The ear-piercing alarm sounded in the sky above the Brewster family. "Go back to your cages, you stupid and despicable people." The guards didn't panic, and the magic casters had already started to build ice and earth walls. In the face of absolute power, numbers didn't bring them any advantage. A smooth and thick ice wall built a sturdy prison cell, allowing them to stand behind the ice wall and mock the slaves who were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Their bodies and would left faint marks on the ice wall, and the slaves roared in anger and helplessness. They looked outside the ice wall and saw the guards humiliating Anton's body, but they couldn't do anything. This feeling of helplessness made them feel deep despair. It was as if they were born with fate and they never had a choice. At this moment, a huge shadow fell from the sky. The thick ice wall suddenly shattered. The magic wand in the magic caster's hands also turned to ashes. Everyone looked up and saw the giant beast shining with purple light under the moonlight, and the beautiful elf with golden light sitting on the giant beast. "It's Princess Irina," a slave shouted. For the first time, panic appeared in the eyes of the guards. "What's going on?" Elliot came out in his pajamas with a frown. A middle-aged elf who looked like a butler came up and said respectfully, "Chief, there's a problem at the farm slave cages. We've already sent the guards over, and they won't be able to cause any trouble." "Humph, these despicable people. I gave them food and clothes so that they could live, and they still dare to cause trouble." Elliot's face turned cold. "Kill a few more this time. Hang them together with the old guy who tried to escape a few days ago. I want to see how badly they want to leave." "Yes, Chief." The butler smiled and left. Elliot yawned and turned to enter the bedroom again. Ever since he was dismissed and returned to his territory, Elliot had felt the free atmosphere that was raging in the wind forest. He sealed off his fief and spread all the news among the slaves and servants. He didn't care about the flood outside. As long as he was in this castle, in this territory, he was still the supreme king, with the right to kill and seize. As it turned out, his method was very effective. While the other lords removed their slave contracts and were forced to release their slaves, he still had thousands of slaves under his control. They were the main force of the farm, supporting the Brewster family and the Wind Forest. Under the steward's lead, thousands of fully armed soldiers of the Brewster family surrounded the slave area. Slaves were not qualified to live in the castle. Like cattle and sheep, they were kept in a low bungalow outside the castle. Therefore, they were also called the slave pen. Outside the short single-story house, there was a fence of iron thorns that was several meters high. The fence was covered with sharp and highly poisonous iron thorns. The flames ignited the slave pen, and noisy sounds came from inside. Those were the sounds of battle and cheers. "Put out the fire, then capture all the despicable bastards who dare to rebel," the steward ordered coldly. The troops agreed. A water elemental magician stepped forward and began to chant a magic spell. There were also fully armed close combat elves who opened the gates in 3 directions and swarmed in. Slaves were just 2-legged livestock with a long lifespan. As long as they had some beauty or magic talent, they would not be kept here. Coupled with the heavy shackles, they had no resistance in front of the powerful army. Many elven soldiers even thought that the guards must be asleep. Otherwise, just the dozens of guards in the slave pen would be enough to suppress the so-called rebellion. However, when they rushed into the slave pen and tried to solve all the problems with one charge and then go back to sleep, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. The battle was over. All the guards had been captured and tied up in the center of the empty space. Apart from the wounds on their faces, there was also endless fear. Meanwhile, those shackled elven slaves with angry and fanatical expressions were currently surrounding those guards. Of course, the elven slaves were not the ones who were shocked. Instead, it was the huge purple-striped griffin floating in midair and the beautiful elf sitting on its back. It's Princess Irina, an elf exclaimed. The elven soldiers who were charging forward subconsciously stopped in their tracks. They looked at Irina and could not muster up any courage to attack. They seemed to understand why the slaves, who had always been obedient, suddenly became excited and radical tonight. Your Highness Irina, I am Dirk from the Brewster family. What brings you here in the middle of the night? The steward said respectfully to Irina. The Brewster family was not a powerful family. Their patriarch, Elliot, was only a 9th-tier magician. They did not even have a 10th-tier powerhouse. Furthermore, this place was far away from the City of Life. Even if they asked for help now, High Priestess Helena might not be able to arrive in time. Anyone with a brain in the Wind Forest knew how powerful Irina was. At this moment, she appeared here and stood on the side of the rebelling slaves. He panicked. Take some elves and leave. Kill some fellows who don't deserve to be called elves, Irina said coldly. Dirk's expression froze. He knew very well that in Irina's eyes, he might be one of those fellows who did not deserve to be called elves. You're Albin, right? Find the murderer who killed Anton and Joe and avenge them. Irina looked at a skinny elf below. Albin nodded. He picked up a blood-stained dagger from the ground and walked toward the tied-up guards. Don't kill me. I didn't kill him. They killed him. The guard leader, who was thrown into the corner with his legs bent, screamed in horror. Albin walked up silently and stabbed the guard leader's thigh. Then he slashed downwards. The tendons and flesh were torn apart and blood spurted out. The guard leader let out a blood-curdling scream. The expressions of the guards and the soldiers standing not far away changed. Someone recognized Albin. He was the skinny monkey who was in charge of slaughtering livestock on the farm. This stab is for Joe. Of course, it's not enough. You stabbed him 12 times. I will pay you back double. In addition, Anton stabbed him 24 times. Also, you won't die before I finish stabbing him. I can guarantee that. Albin looked at the guard leader and said coldly. He raised his hand and made a cut on the guard leader's left leg, pulling out a tendon. Chapter 21:02. The screams of the leader of the guards were accompanied by the sounds of sharp blades slicing through flesh, piercing through the dark night. The elven slaves all had elated looks on their faces. That was what they often thought when they were being oppressed for the past 100 years. There were no less than 10 slaves who had been tortured to death by this guy over the years. His methods were even crueler than this. The guards who were tied up had already begun to tremble in horror. They never would have thought that the slaves who could only be slaughtered by them would become existences who could kill them at will. Furthermore, they would really kill. Dirk and the elven soldiers under him were also shocked at this moment. They were in a dilemma. On the 48th stab, Albin stabbed the sword into the guard's heart, then let go of his hand and took a few steps back. He knelt down beside Anton's unrecognizable corpse and began to cry bitterly. Irina waved her hand and cut off all the shackles. Then she looked at the over 3,000 elven slaves below and said, "An eye for an eye. Today, I hope you can leave this place without hatred and start a new life." The elven slaves fell silent for a while. Someone picked up a sword and walked toward those guards. Princess Irina, I don't think the High Priestess would want to see something like this. I hope you can reconsider. Princess Sally will be back in a few days. Dirk stepped forward nervously. Everything I've done is what Helena doesn't want to see, including my existence. Irina looked at Dirk and suddenly grinned. Then what do you think I should do? Make me disappear completely? Dirk choked. He wanted to, but he didn't dare to say it, and he couldn't do it. Before Dirk could say anything, Irina took out a black book and announced loudly, Dirk Brewster, Elliot's #1 butler, the absolute executioner of orders, and the executioner who is stained with the blood of many elves. Today, I sentence you to death, and you will be executed on the spot. No. Dirk turned around and tried to escape. A beam of light ignited his body, and he turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. The elven soldiers' mental defenses collapsed instantly, and they scattered like birds and beasts. As for those elven guards, almost all of them were killed by the slave elves. Only 5 of them were left, and they were protected by a few elves who were working hard. They were forced to become guards. Their hearts are kind, and they even helped us before, an old elf said loudly, convincing his companions to let the guards go. Princess Irina! Princess Irina! All of the fairies looked at Irina with fanatical expressions in their eyes. Just when they thought they were going to fall back into a life of despair, or even worse, she appeared. She broke through the ice wall, disarmed the guards' weapons and magic wands, and killed the evil and terrifying Dirk. She was like a ray of light in the endless darkness, bringing them hope. Now, I'll take you away from here and start a new life. Irina looked at the elves below and said loudly, "You're free." The wall of iron thorns fell and turned into ashes in the flames. "We're free." Freedom. All of the fairies' eyes lit up as they looked around at the open field. There was no iron thorns in the sky, and everything seemed to have changed. "Let's go, I'll guide you," Irina said. A ray of light landed in front of them, and a path of light led into the distance. The fairies walked along the path of light. Albin bent over and picked up Anton's corpse and said softly, "Let's go, Anton. I'll take you to see the outside world." His small body bent over as he carried the corpse forward, and he stubbornly refused everyone's help. The castle not far away was brightly lit, and the city gates were closed. Irina looked in the direction of the castle and thought, "Elliot, your life belongs to Shirley, so you can keep it for a while." Has she left? After a long while, Elliot poked his head out of the bunker and asked, "Chief, they've already left." "They're heading south," someone outside replied. "He really left?" Elliot was in disbelief. "Yes, the slave pen is empty. All the slaves have escaped," the person outside replied. He then asked, "Should we chase after them?" Elliot was so angry that he jumped out of the bunker and slapped him. He looked at the young elf and said, "Are you going to chase after them alone?" That elf took half a step back and shook his head with an aggrieved expression. "Damn Irina." Elliot paced around the room and suddenly stopped. He clapped his hands and said, "Yes, we have to chase after them. You, bring 500 men and chase after them to the west," Elliot said as he pointed at the elf from before. That elf's expression changed, but he quickly said, "But they're heading south. If we want to chase after them, shouldn't we go south? What do you plan to do if we really chase after them?" Elliot looked at him. That elf was taken aback, and he looked a little scared. "Then why aren't you fucking chasing after them to the west?" Elliot lifted his leg and kicked him. Yes. That elf scrambled away. Soon, a team of 500 cavalrymen set off and chased after them to the west. Send a request for reinforcements to the City of Life immediately, and then send a letter to the High Priestess via Eagle. Tell her that Irina killed hundreds of guards and soldiers of the Brewster family, kidnapped 3,000 slaves, and fled in the southwest direction. The Brewster family has already sent soldiers to chase after them and request for reinforcements, Elliot ordered. The eagle flew out of the castle and flew in the direction of the City of Life. Half an hour later, the castle received a reply from the City of Life. After reading the letter, Elliot almost ate the envelope. That damn old woman. Is she so scared of Irina? Damn it. Do you know why I didn't send my troops? Helena asked Sally in the Starry Cave Mansion. Elliot is not a trustworthy person. He doesn't have the guts to fight with Irina, and he doesn't have any form of resistance, Sally said calmly. Also, the freeing of slaves has already reached a consensus in the Wind Forest. This is an irresistible trend. Looks like you agree with Irina's actions. Helena looked at Sally. I'm on the side of the trend. Now, most of the elves in the Wind Forest will agree with her actions. Sally remained calm. Helena smiled and lamented, if Elliot had half of your wisdom and temperament, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Sally fell silent. After a long while, she looked up at Helena and asked, Are you really going to make the Wind Forest undergo another revolution? I was going to, but I'm afraid it's too late now. Helena shook her head. She raised her hand, and a video began to play in the air. This is... Sally's expression changed drastically. Chapter 2103. That's a total of 178,642 copper coins. Miss, we're rich. Mara put the last copper coin into the money box and looked at Ify with surprise. She had followed Ify for more than 10 years. She had seen Ify run a tavern by herself and sell cheap drinks. After working hard for a day, she only earned 2,000 to 3,000 copper coins. But today, when they opened for business, they actually received so much money in one go. She had never seen so much cash in front of her in her entire life. Ify took out a dragon coin from the money box and gently blew on it. She put it next to her ear and listened to the pleasant sound of the money. She also smiled and said, "In the future, we will have this much every day. Our good days are coming." No one would think that having too much money was a problem, right? So much money, where are we going to put it? Mara asked. In the past, they only had a few thousand copper coins a day. They could easily carry it upstairs, and it was only enough to maintain the tavern's operation. Now that they suddenly had such a huge amount of money, it was unrealistic to carry it upstairs. They would have to carry it back and forth a few times. Moreover, it didn't seem safe to just leave it in the room. Ify thought for a moment and said, "Let's put it in the wine cellar for the time being. When we have 1,000,000 copper coins, we will exchange it for banknotes from Buffett Bank." Okay. Mara picked up the box full of dragon coins and gold coins and prepared to move the most valuable box to the wine cellar. Dong dong. At this time, a heavy knock on the door suddenly sounded. Who is it? Ify and Mara were stunned for a moment and looked in the direction of the door. Bang! The wooden door that was protected by a magic barrier was knocked open. A fierce-looking man with a huge axe in his hand jumped in and looked at Ify and Mara with a hideous smile. "Who are you? What do you want?" Mara shouted loudly. "Run!" Ify looked at the man, and her face turned white. She grabbed Mara and ran towards the back of the tavern. Mara lost her grip on the money box, and the dragon coins and gold coins fell to the ground with a tinkling sound. Little girl, where are you running? Give all the money to me and let me have a good time. I won't kill you." The burly man grinned as he chased after Ify and the others with large strides, knocking aside all the tables and chairs along the way. Eiffel pulled Mara into the winery, pulled open the cellar door, and pushed Mara in. Then, she jumped down and pulled the heavy cellar door down with all her strength. The moment the door of the cellar fell, she saw a huge axe raised high and then smashed down. Bang! A muffled sound reverberated in the cellar. Ify's hand was numb from the shock. He quickly loosened his grip on the handle. Mara fell to the floor of the wine cellar. Her beautiful face turned pale and her voice trembled as she said, Miss, what is he doing?" Seeing that the defensive magic circle had been activated, Ify's face relaxed a little. He came down from the escalator, squatted on the ground, hugged Mara, and patted her shoulder. "Don't be afraid. The cellar is safe. He can't come in." Bang! 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 A muffled sound of collision came from the cellar door. The defensive formation was shaking, and sand and dust fell down from the cracks. Eiffel hugged Mara. Her expression was serious, and her face was also pale. The memories that she had thrown to the back of her mind once again came rushing back. It was still this wine cellar. Back then, her father used all his strength to put her in the cellar, and then used his body to block the entrance of the cellar. That was the most terrifying scene she had seen in her life. Her father was hacked to death in front of the cellar by that thug with an axe. His blood seeped into the cellar and dripped into the dark cellar. Then, that thug crazily smashed the cellar door for more than 10 minutes before unwillingly leaving. At that time, she was young and could only cry in fear in the corner, hoping that someone would open the cellar door and save her. 15 years later, when Titan Winery was about to return to normal, the same thing happened again. The light of the defensive barrier was dimming, and the sound of the door being smashed was getting louder and louder. Eiffel hugged Mara tightly. The fear that made her body cold came again. What was different from 15 years ago was that she was no longer a child. There was a dim yellow light in the cellar, and Mara was trembling in her arms. "Miss, does he want to kill us?" Mara's eyes were full of fear. She looked up at Eiffel and asked, "It's okay." Eiffel hugged her a little tighter. She knew that the person outside was probably coming for them. The money was all outside, a full 170,000 copper coins. If he came for the money, he could just take it away. but he was wasting time and energy to attack the cellar. It was clear that his goal was not only the money, but also them. Thinking that she would fall into the hands of such a ferocious and terrifying man, Eiphel's heart turned cold. The two of them snuggled up to each other in the cellar, praying that someone would hear the sound and come to scare away the thug outside. But there were no residents around the winery. It was late at night, so no one would be able to hear the sound here. Eiffel thought of Mr. Hades, who lived across the street, but after thinking about it, she gave up on this idea. Although Mr. Hades was a man full of wisdom, he was not a strong man. Moreover, he had 2 children and a beautiful wife. She was definitely not willing to let him and his family suffer any harm because of her. She was very clear that this kind of thug would not care who appeared in the winery. "Father, it seems like someone is causing trouble in the winery across the street." Amy, who was wearing bare pajamas, opened the curtains and looked at the Titan winery across the street. "Yes, it seems like a bad guy went in. Meg, do you want to go beat the bad guy together?" Meg, who was wearing a bathrobe, used a towel to dry his hair and asked with a smile. He had just put on a lather when he noticed the movement across the street. But he was sure that Eiffel and the others had already entered the wine cellar, and the thug had not broken through the magic barrier of the wine cellar yet. So he was not in a hurry to put on a show of being naked and saving the damsel in distress. Instead, he quickly took a shower and put on a bathrobe. Okay. Amy loves beating bad guys the most." Amy's eyes lit up as she nodded her little head repeatedly. She looked around and picked up a small folding chair in the corner. She waved it around and nodded with satisfaction. She looked at Meg and said, "Let's go." Meg looked at her folding chair and raised his eyebrows. This mother and daughter pair had very similar preferences. "Okay, let's go." Meg stepped on a pair of slippers, opened the window, and jumped down from the second floor. Amy picked up the folding chair and also jumped down from the second floor. The father and daughter pair, who were wearing pajamas, walked into the shattered Titan winery. Chapter 2104. A bare-chested, 2-meter-tall giant man with a valiant aura was crazily chopping at the cellar door with a huge black axe in his hand. Every time the axe chopped down, the light barrier on the cellar door would shake and the light would weaken a bit. The giant man smiled. This meant that the barrier wouldn't last much longer. He would soon be able to chop open the cellar door with his axe, and then grab the 2 beauties hiding inside. Thinking of the beautiful female boss, her beautiful body, and her charming appearance, tonight they would all belong to him, and he would be able to ravage them. He was even more motivated. "Damn magician." The giant man spat out a mouthful of saliva, took a short breath, and held the axe high above his head with both hands. His muscles tightened, and a black light condensed on the edge of the axe, and then he suddenly chopped down. "Gotcha!" Along with a crisp sound, a series of cracks appeared on the magic barrier, which quickly spread until it completely shattered. The axe fell on the cellar door without any resistance, and with a solid muffled sound, a crack also appeared on the cellar door. "Success! Ha ha ha!" The giant man grinned and couldn't help but gasp for breath. But the magic barrier had already been chopped down, and the next step was simple. The woman in the cellar was much more valuable than the gold coins on the ground. "Mara, hide in the innermost wine cellar. No matter what happens, don't come out." Effie got up and pushed Mara into the passage. "No, miss, I won't go anywhere. I want to stay by your side. I won't leave you." Mara hugged her arm and cried while shaking her head. Her fearful face was full of determination. The magic barrier had already been chopped down, and Effie knew that the terrifying thug would soon come in. Her hands and feet were cold, and her heart was full of despair. Why was it like this? 15 years ago, she had already lost her parents, and tonight she would lose her life in the same way. She had already grasped the dagger that she had always hidden. If that guy wanted to humiliate her, she would never let him succeed. Perhaps it would be a good place to end her life in this wine cellar that contained her father's life's work. Or maybe 15 years ago, she should have left with her parents. Then, at least Mara wouldn't be trapped here with her. She was still a child. Effie couldn't bear to look at Mara. The giant man once again raised the giant axe in his hand, panting heavily. With this swing of the axe, he would be able to completely destroy this terrible cellar door. This kind of physical work must be very tiring. A voice suddenly sounded from behind. Yes, I'm exhausted. The giant man nodded. His eyes widened as he suddenly turned his head to look behind him. Behind him, a young man and a little girl had appeared out of nowhere. One of them was leaning against the door frame, while the other was sitting on a small chair, looking like they were watching a show. It seemed like they had been there for a long time. Who are you? The giant man was shocked. He turned around and shouted at Meg. We are neighbors. We live just across from each other. We came over to take a look since there were so many noises in the middle of the night. Did Miss Effie hire a construction team to replace the door and clean the cellar? Mag chuckled. Oh, it's your neighbor. The giant man slowly put down the axe in his hand. A simple and honest smile appeared on his ferocious face. He looked at Meg and determined that he was just a weak chicken of an ordinary man. He slowly walked toward him with the axe in his hand. Yes, we were about to go to sleep, but you woke us up. Amy pouted as she looked at the giant man. You really are a terrible guy. Miss, listen. It's Mr. Hades's voice. Mara suddenly pointed up and said with surprise. Effie, who was waiting for the last swing of the axe, also suddenly raised her head. Hope suddenly rose in her heart, but she quickly heard Amy's voice. Her face showed panic. She raised her head and shouted at the top of her voice. Run. Mr. Hades. He's a thug. Effie's voice came from the cellar. Meg looked at the giant man and asked with a smile, Is that so? She's right. There's a price to pay for meddling in other people's business. The silly smile on the giant man's face disappeared. His face was full of fat. He raised the giant axe in his hand and chopped down at Meg. He roared, Die for me. Bang! A muffled sound. The giant man with the axe was instantly sent flying. He was then embedded in the wall. His eyes were wide open and full of disbelief. Crawl for me. Amy held the folding chair with one hand and looked at the giant man and said in a childish voice, Look at you. How can you be so careless? Meg took 2 steps forward and smiled at the giant man who was struggling to dig himself out of the wall. I'm going to kill you. Although the giant man was shocked, he was also furious. He held the giant axe with both hands and rushed toward Amy again. On the axe, a black light flashed. He no longer held back. Bang! Another muffled sound of the folding chair hitting the giant man's face. The giant man was sent flying again. Lying on the ground, the 3 red lines on his face couldn't hide his shock and despair. Yes, he was sent flying by a little girl who looked like she was only 4 years old. And it was with a folding chair. He was sent flying twice in a row. This kind of thing happened like a nightmare. Meg looked at the dragon coins and gold coins scattered on the ground. He walked forward with a smile and stepped on the giant man's right hand that was trying to hold the axe again. The fingers that were like iron rods were directly flattened and stuck to the handle of the axe like meat paste. Ah! The giant man let out a blood-curdling scream. His face instantly turned deathly pale, and large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Tell me, who sent you? Meg looked down at the giant man and said with a smile, If you don't want your other hand to become like this, you'd better not try to play any tricks. No one sent me. I came here on my own. I know they made a lot of money today. I'm sure of money. The giant man growled and stared at Meg with his bloodshot eyes. I know you're sure of money, but what you're short of is not the money on the ground. Meg went around to the other side and stepped on the giant man's other hand. He slowly increased his strength and continued to ask with a smile, So, who promised you more money to deal with Mrs. Effie? The giant man looked in horror at his left hand's fingers that began to deform under Meg's foot. The joints creaked, and the piercing pain came again. He knew that Meg wasn't scaring him. He would really crush his fingers. Black market. It's a black market mission. The giant man screamed in horror. Pop! His left hand had also been stomped to pieces. I'm sorry. I thought you'd be a little harder. Meg looked at the screaming giant man apologetically. He withdrew his foot and wiped the soles of his shoes on the giant man's body. Chapter 2105. AI phase. Nerves were stretched to the limit. It was one thing to encounter the same thing after so many years, but she didn't expect that Mr. Hades' family would be involved as well. Chaotic sounds came from outside the cellar. Mr. Hades seemed to be struggling with the thug, and he was screaming in pain. Mara, I have to go out. I can't let Mr. Hades suffer because of me. But Miss, Mara grabbed AI Faye's sleeve. If something happens to Mr. Hades' family because of me, my soul will never be forgiven. AI Faye looked into Mara's eyes and said, Then I'll go out with you. Mara let go of her hand and said with a firm gaze. AI Faye held the dagger and climbed up the ladder. She pried open the locked cellar door and pushed it open. As the cellar door slowly opened, screams of pain could be clearly heard. AI Faye and Mara's faces were slightly pale, but they still pushed the cellar door open. I'm here, don't... AI Faye jumped out of the cellar and shouted. Then, her eyes suddenly widened, and she looked at the huge man lying on the ground and screaming in disbelief. Meg, who had one foot on the giant's indescribable position, and Amy, who was sitting on a small chair. Crack! It was the sound of his balls breaking. Ah, I'm sorry, I was nervous. Meg took back his foot and took half a step back as he said apologetically. Ah! The giant screamed as his eyeballs popped out. He was in so much pain that he almost fainted. Mara also jumped out of the cellar with a bottle of wine in her hand. She already had a look of desperation on her face. She just happened to see this scene. Crack! The wine bottle fell to the ground and shattered. Miss AI Faye, Mara, are you all right? Meg looked at AI Faye and asked with a smile. His voice was filled with concern. I'm fine. AI Faye tried hard to look away from the thug on the ground. There were 3 bright red lines on his face, 2 disfigured hands, and something seemed to be broken between his legs. Mr. Hades, AI Faye wanted to show concern for them, but it seemed that the current situation was beyond her understanding. A thug that was fierce enough to cut through a magic barrier set up by a 5th-rank mage was reduced to such a miserable state after encountering Hades and his daughter. It was simply unimaginable. We were just about asleep when we heard an unusual sound, so we came over to take a look. I didn't expect to see this big idiot crazily hurting himself as soon as I entered the room. He even smashed his own hand. The situation is critical, so I can only use some special methods to calm him down. Meg looked at Ify with a smile. You should believe me, right? AI Faye looked at the gentle smile on Meg's face, and her panicked heart seemed to be soothed. That kind of security was something she hadn't felt for many years. All these years, she had never thought of finding herself a person to snuggle up to. She would rather make the cellar more solid than find herself a man. But at this moment, she suddenly thought if Mr. Hades was by their side tonight, then she wouldn't have to hide in the cellar, right? I believe you. AI Faye nodded. Woo woo woo. The giant lying on the ground stared at Meg with his eyes wide open, as if he had something to say about his dignity. Although the situation is a bit complicated, this big idiot still revealed some information to thank me for stopping his impulse to hurt himself. Meg nodded and said, Do you have any irreconcilable enemies? The kind that would buy your life in the black market? Sell my life in the black market? AI Faye's expression changed slightly as she looked at the thug on the ground. Sure enough, her previous guess was right. This guy didn't just come for the money. I shouldn't have any enemies. These years, Titan Tavern's business hasn't been good, let alone the jealousy of my peers. AI Faye shook her head. Yes, our family's miss gets along well with the neighbors. She has never been angry. Mara nodded. So it's like that. Meg muttered, and his eyes fell on the giant on the ground again. This hero, when did you accept this black market mission? Tell me the details. Meg asked with a smile, and one of his feet stepped on the giant's arm. Don't step. I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything. The giant hurriedly shouted, afraid that Meg would cause another accident. This mission just appeared on the black market yesterday. The requirement is to kidnap the owner of Titan Tavern, then burn down the tavern and tavern. The commission is 1 million copper coins. The employer will confirm the result himself. After the mission is completed, the employer will receive half of the commission. The employer will give the delivery address through the black market and receive the rest of the commission. The giant quickly finished his words. Then Meg still broke his arm. Treating 2 weak ladies like this, you're really despicable. Meg retracted his foot and looked at the screaming giant with disdain. Fuck! The giant cursed. However, before he could finish his sentence, a folding chair hit him in the face. Have some manners, don't use profanity. Amy held the chair with one hand and said in a childish voice. AI Faye looked at the giant's face that had turned into a square, and then looked at Amy. She was a little confused, saying the most civilized words and doing the most ferocious work. The giant's face turned red, and he snorted a few times. His temper was gone. Obviously, the mastermind is after you and the Titan wine in the tavern, Miss AI Faye, Meg said to AI Faye. A new mission that had just appeared yesterday, with a high commission and a clear target, but not a clear direction. Moreover, the mastermind was very cautious. They issued the mission through the black market without any direct contact with the culprit. Even the commission was done through the black market. Who could it be? We just got the gold award yesterday. AI Faye frowned, puzzled. Actually, it's very simple to find the mastermind. As long as we complete the black market mission and hand you over to him, we'll naturally know who's behind all this. Meg smiled. Mr. Hades, you mean to burn down the tavern and then hand me over to the mastermind? AI Faye looked at Meg, and her expression changed. 1 million copper coins, that's a lot of money. Amy sat down again and counted with her fingers. Meg looked at the nervous AI, Faye, and Mara, and quickly shook his head with a smile. Don't misunderstand. I mean, we could direct a scene and personally meet the mastermind. Of course, we can't burn down the tavern, and we can't destroy the tavern. But what should we do? AI Faye frowned. Isn't there a tool here? Meg smiled and squatted down beside the giant. He patted his shoulder and said, right? Chapter 2106. That night, something big happened on Romo Street. The owner of the Titan Tavern, Miss Effie, who had just won the gold medal of the wine tasting conference, was robbed after business hours. All the profits of the day were stolen, and the owner, Effie, and her maid, Mara, disappeared. Only a pool of blood and a mess was left at the scene. It was said that the scene was set on fire. Fortunately, the good neighbor, Mr. Hades, found the fire in time and put it out, saving some losses. The next morning, this incident spread throughout Romo Street and the entire tavern world of Rodu. Everyone sighed at this. I didn't expect this to happen to Boss Effie again. Fate is so unfair. Yeah, Miss Effie is such a good person. Why did she have to be involved in this? Let's pray for Miss Effie. Let's hope she's fine. This time, the Titan Tavern won't disappear just like that, right? The neighbors gathered together and looked at the Titan Tavern that had been cordoned off by the soldiers with heavy expressions. Did you sleep well last night? Meg, who was scooping porridge, asked Effie with a smile as she came downstairs. I slept very well. Effie nodded. She was also a little surprised that she could fall asleep as soon as she lay down on the bed last night. She hadn't slept so comfortably in a long time. Effie walked to Meg and bowed deeply as she thanked him sincerely. The bed was very comfortable. Thank you very much for last night. You're welcome. We're neighbors, so we should help each other. Meg shook his head. Fortunately, his wife wasn't at home. Otherwise, such a strange sentence would definitely cause unnecessary misunderstandings. AI Faye also realized that her words were a little strange, and a faint blush appeared on her face. Soon, she caught a whiff of a rich aroma, and she looked at the bowl in Mag's hand with a surprised expression as she said, "It smells so good. Is this your porridge?" As she said that, her stomach started to grumble uncontrollably. Yes, I cooked some porridge in the morning and made a few steamers of soup dumplings. Meg nodded and turned off the fire in the steamer at the side. He said, "If Miss Effie is hungry, have some porridge first. I'll go and wake the children up." "It's okay, I won't." Gulialu. AI Faye was defeated by her stomach, and she accepted the porridge that Mag passed to her. The warm bowl, like his hand, made people feel at ease, and Effie's heart slightly rippled. "By the way, is your wife not at home?" AI Faye asked curiously. After all the commotion yesterday, she and Mara were brought home by Mag, but they didn't see his wife. "Oh, she went back to her mother's house. She should be back today," Meg answered casually. He took off his apron and went upstairs. AI Faye looked at Meg's back and couldn't help but think, Mr. Hades is really a good man. He can take care of a child by himself and still make such a delicious breakfast. I envy his wife. By the way, the neighbors are praying for you at the entrance of your tavern. Today, you and Mara will stay on the second floor of the tavern. Don't go out or show your face. Meg quickly came downstairs. He looked at AI Faye, who was taking small bites of the porridge, and said, I'll go to the Yamen to record my statement, and then I'll go to the black market to contact the person who issued the mission. AI Faye didn't expect Meg to come down so quickly. She quickly put down the spoon, pursed her lips, and nodded. Okay. Meg looked at her and pointed at the corner of her mouth with a smile. There's a grain of porridge. AI Faye quickly licked the corner of her mouth with her tongue and blushed. Is it to your liking? Meg sat down across from her. Yes, Mr. Hades's porridge is the most delicious I've ever had. AI Faye nodded. These words were completely from the heart. She had never had such delicious porridge. The translucent and bouncy mysterious ingredients, as well as the smooth and tender lean meat. The texture was so smooth that even her soul was soothed with just one bite. Soon, Amy and Mara also came downstairs. Wow, can we eat soup dumplings this morning? My favorite. Amy looked at the tall steamer basket, and her eyes lit up. Mississippi. Mara rubbed her sleepy eyes and sat down next to AI Faye. However, she quickly got up and greeted Meg. Meg brought the soup dumplings over. Without needing him to say anything, Amy had already started to demonstrate to AI, Faye, and Mara how to take a soup dumpling out of the steamer basket and how to eat it properly. AI, Faye, and Mara looked at Amy's actions with astonishment. As they smelled the aroma of meat wafting through the air and watched the little girl drink the broth, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Mr. Hades, did you also personally make these exquisite pastries? AI, Faye asked in disbelief as she looked at Meg, who was sitting across from her. Yes, I don't know if it's your liking. Meg nodded and also took a soup dumpling for himself. AI, Faye copied Amy and picked up a soup dumpling. The thin skin of the dumpling was filled with broth. After picking it up, she shook it left and right as if it would explode at any time. She carefully placed it into her shallow plate and breathed a sigh of relief. These soup dumplings were really amazing. She didn't know how Mr. Hades was able to completely wrap the broth into the thin skin of the dumpling. Then she copied Amy and took a small bite on the top of the soup dumpling. The broth immediately gushed out from the hole. She quickly covered the hole with her mouth and sipped the broth in small mouthfuls. Hot! The soup dumplings had just come out of the oven, and the broth inside was still a little hot. However, when the delicious broth entered her mouth, her attention was immediately focused on the broth. It was so delicious that it was intoxicating, and it completely suppressed the burning sensation. Oh, what an amazing smell! I can't describe this feeling. AI Faye's delicate eyebrows raised slightly. Compared to the delicious porridge, the broth was more invasive and hard to resist. When the broth was almost finished, AI Faye raised her head and licked her lips as if she hadn't had enough. Then she used her chopsticks to pick up the already shriveled bun and took a bite. The chewy skin wrapped around the meat that was soaked in broth. It wasn't fat or greasy, and it was smooth in the mouth. It was another wonderful experience. It's really delicious. AI Faye put down her chopsticks and looked at Meg with a face full of praise. Your cooking is amazing. Yes, she was starting to feel a little jealous of Irina. To be able to marry such a gentle and considerate man who could cook such delicious food, it was really enviable. Delicious, too delicious. I want to cry. Mara held the bowl and licked the broth at the bottom with tears in her eyes. Eat. There's enough for you. Meg smiled and gave her another bun. This little girl was quite honest. After Meg finished his breakfast, AI, Faye, and Mara took the initiative to wash the dishes, and he went out directly. However, when he opened the door, a group of neighbors immediately surrounded him. Boss Hades, what happened last night? Chapter 21:07. Mag recounted what happened last night with a lot of exaggeration. The intensity was no less than Tsun Takashi beating up Lai Fu. In the end, he had to make an excuse that he had to go to the yamen to give a statement, and only then was he able to extricate himself from the onlookers. There were customers from the Ministry of Law who had been drinking at Saipan Tavern these past few days, so they recognized Meg. On top of that, he was Duke Abraham, so they didn't make things difficult for him. Instead, they allowed him to give a statement and even commended him. Boss Hades, if you have any news about this case today, please contact us immediately. The staff walked Mag to the door and reminded him, also, you have to take care of your safety. All right, thank you. Mag nodded and then left right away. The thug was still being held captive on the roof of his building, and he had obtained some information about the black market from him the night before. After passing 5 streets, he turned into an alley, and when he emerged from another alley, Meg had already changed his disguise. He was a chubby man with sideburns all over his face. His disguise was quite particular. His nickname was Kabaz, and he was a vicious character in the black market. It was a pity that he was a stutterer and didn't speak much. Before going to the black market, Meg went to 2 intelligence agencies and bought some information about the black market. The black market was a secret organization in the underground world of Rodu. People engaged in shady transactions here. Slaves, lives, elves. As long as you had the money, the black market could satisfy all of your needs. Not only was this black market renowned in Rodu, but it was also renowned throughout the entire Norland continent. It was said that the black market had a secret relationship with the royal family of the Roth Empire, and that was why it had been entrenched in the underground world of Rodu for so many years. This massive underground organization didn't have a massive headquarters. Instead, it had many scattered strongholds scattered all over Rodu. Those who held the black market badge would be allowed to enter the strongholds, and they would be able to entrust missions to the black market or accept missions from others. In order to play it safe, Meg didn't use the badge that the thug had given him last night. Instead, he bought a new badge from the intelligence agency, which was equivalent to obtaining a new identity in the underground world. Anyone could accept missions from the black market, and there were no restrictions. They only cared about the rewards and rewards. This was undoubtedly good news for Meg. Meg went to the nearest black market contact point. It was a rather dilapidated bungalow. After showing his dog tag and entering, he put on a tattered mask and followed a short man in a black robe into the underground passage. After passing through a long passageway, a rather spacious hall appeared. There were quite a number of people in the hall. They all looked rather valiant and had obvious characteristics. The masks on their faces were just for show. Everyone wanted to make a name for themselves in the martial arts world, so they would usually dress up in a special way. It would be best if they could be thrown out as soon as they appeared. For example, Meg was attracted by the girl in front of him who was carrying a huge sunflower on her shoulder. He thought to himself, if you peel off the sunflower seeds, wouldn't they be bigger than walnuts? Handwritten mission slips were hung on the wall. Most of the people in the hall were crowded in front of the mission board, thinking about what mission to accept. There was a wooden plaque beside the mission list. Taking the wooden plaque was equivalent to accepting the mission. Each contact point only had 1 mission slot. Therefore, when some missions with high rewards appeared, it was not uncommon to see people fighting over the missions. Meg also took a few glances. There are all kinds of strange missions. Killing people accounted for 1/3 of the missions. There were also requests to buy all kinds of magical beast cubs, elven maids, succubi ladies, goblin lolas. Wait, the last guy's taste is a little special. Meg withdrew his gaze and walked straight to the mission exchange hall. Lifting the black curtain, a passageway appeared. There were 2 black-robed men standing in front of the passageway. They reached out and stopped Meg. Meg took out a black plaque and threw it over. One of the black-robed men caught the plaque and checked it. He nodded and returned the plaque, making way for Meg to pass. At the end of the passageway was a black iron door. Meg walked to the door, and the iron door slowly opened inwards. Inside the door was a display window. On the wall, there was only a hole the size of a human head. It was pitch black behind the hole, and there was a wooden stool in front of the display window. Our brave mercenary, what mission did you complete? A hoarse voice came from behind the hole. Kidnapped a woman. Mag sat down on that wooden stool and casually tossed that amulet into that black hole. His expression was nonchalant, but his eyes were carefully sizing up that black hole. The office naturally could not be pitch black. It was just a high-level camouflage. Okay, please wait a moment. We need to verify. The hoarse voice sounded, and then it was completely silent. About 15 minutes later, the hoarse voice sounded again. Sorry for the long wait. After our verification, the owner of Titan Tavern was indeed kidnapped. It seems that she is in your hands. However, one of the missions was to burn down the wine cellar and tavern. Unfortunately, you did not complete it. According to the rules, you can only get half of the commission. I clearly set the place on fire. Meg spat. Oh, you did set her on fire, but it was extinguished by the owner of the tavern opposite her. If you need it, you can post a revenge mission here. A slightly cheerful voice came from inside the room. No need. Meg raised his eyebrows. This black market really knows how to do business? Here is a deposit of $250,000 and the delivery address and time. We will inform the employer, but we cannot guarantee that you will get the rest of the commission. A black money bag and a piece of paper were handed out from the black hole. Okay. Meg grabbed the heavy money bag and the piece of paper, got up and left. Out of the black market, Meg found an alley and opened the money bag. It was full of golden dragon coins, 250 dragon coins. Then he opened the piece of paper. On it was written, Broken tiled house at the end of Earth Building Alley in the west of the city. Meg put away the piece of paper and dispelled his disguise. He hailed a horse-drawn carriage and went straight to Earth Building Alley in the west of the city. The coachman took Mag's money and looked at the dilapidated alley as he asked, I don't even see a single person here. There are quite a lot of scum here. What are you doing here, sir? I'm here to see a friend. Meg jumped down from the carriage with a smile. He looked on as the horse-drawn carriage sped away, then made his way toward Earth Building Alley 3 streets away in an unhurried manner. The slums of Rendezvous were situated in the west of the city, and Earth Building Alley was even more secluded. There were dilapidated walls on both sides of the street, and the roads were filled with weeds. To be able to find such a secluded place in Rendezvous, it was clear that this wasn't the first time that this person was plotting something like this. Meg climbed over a few walls and arrived at the courtyard at the end of Earth Building Alley. However, he didn't enter Earth Building Alley directly. There's no one here. Meg stood outside the courtyard for a while with a puzzled look on his face. Interesting. Looks like I have to make the act real to lure the snake out of its hole. Chapter 2108. When Meg returned to the tavern, Irina and AI, Faye, were drinking tea. You're back. Meg felt a little guilty, but looking at the two sitting across from each other, the atmosphere seemed to be more harmonious than he expected. Did you find the person? Irina looked at Meg and asked. It seemed that AI, Faye, had already told Irina about what happened last night. Mag shook his head and said no. The other party is more cunning. I got the location, but there was no one there. There should be someone keeping an eye on us. They would only come out to meet us after they saw Miss Effie there. Mr. Hades went to find the mastermind alone? AI Faye was slightly surprised. She thought that Meg only went to the Yamen to record a statement. Yes, if we want to find a mastermind, we have to make the act real. Miss AI Faye will have to come with me to lure out the person hiding behind the scenes. Meg nodded, but won't that be too dangerous? AI Faye was a little worried. She didn't want Mr. Hades and his family to be in danger again for her. It's okay, I'll go too. Irina put down her teacup and said with a cold expression, I despise bastards who lay their hands on women the most. AI Faye looked at the righteous Irina. She was a little touched and a little ashamed. AI Faye was so indignant for her, but she was greedy for AI Faye's husband. She was too cheap. I'll go too. Amy quickly raised her small hand and actively participated. Okay, then you guys get ready. I'll call a carriage and leave from the backyard. Meg nodded and whispered a few words to Irina before leaving through the back door. Soon after, A shabby carriage stopped in the backyard of the Saipan Tavern for a while and then slowly drove away towards the west of the city. Should we inform the Yamen? If we go, will we be in danger? AI face sat in the carriage and looked at Irina and Amy sitting across from her. She was a little worried. If we go, the bad guys will be in danger. Amy nodded. I've already informed the Yamen. They should be here soon. Once the thugs are arrested, this matter will be over. Meg agreed outside the carriage. That's good. AI Faye was slightly relieved. The carriage soon arrived at the western part of the city. It drove into the desolate Tulu alley and stopped at the end of the alley. After putting on a disguise, Meg entered the carriage and carried the tied-up Effie out. He then kicked open the broken wooden door and walked in. It might take a while, but don't worry, Miss Effie, I will protect you. Mag found a relatively intact house and put Effie down. He found an old chair in the corner for her to sit on and lowered his voice as he said, Don't worry. Yes. AI Faye twisted her completely tied-up body uncomfortably. Her face was slightly red, and she was inexplicably excited. Meg glanced at AI Faye, who was tied up in a tortoise shell, and his eyelids twitched. He wondered where Irina had learned this technique. Don't say. It was quite interesting. What if no one comes? AI Faye asked. The other party's main target is you. If they don't come, then there's no need to go through so much trouble. Meg smiled and shook his head. He then looked at AI Faye and seriously said, But if the Yamen people come, Miss Effie must deal with them according to what I taught you before. Yes, I'll remember. I definitely won't drag Mr. Hades and you into this. AI Faye nodded solemnly. Okay, then we'll wait here and see who the mastermind is. Meg didn't say anything else and quietly stood to the side. Boss, they're here. In a 3-story wooden pavilion not far from Tulu Alley, a black-robed man whispered to a figure standing by the window. Where's the woman? The man asked. I brought her. Go and bring her back. If there's a trap, you know what to do, right? The man said in a low voice. The black-robed man's face showed a trace of hesitation, but he still took out a pill and put it in his mouth. Go, the man ordered. The black-robed man quickly went downstairs and left. The man standing in front of the window slowly turned around. Surprisingly, it was the owner of the tavern, Boris. Meg and AI Faye didn't have to wait for too long. 5 black-robed men walked into the dilapidated courtyard and went straight to the house where Meg and AI Faye were. AI Faye showed a bit of panic and subconsciously raised her head to look at Meg, who was standing to the side. The leader of the black-robed men first looked at the tied-up AI Faye, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Then he waved his hand at Meg and threw a black bag of money to him. He said in a low voice, 250,000 copper coins. You can go. Meg flipped the bag of money in his hand and casually tied it to his waist. However, he still stood in the same place and looked at the black-robed man with a smile. I'm very curious. Which boss is willing to spend so much money for us to tie up this woman? The rules of the black market are to do things with money. Why do you have so many questions? The black-robed man coldly shouted and stared at Meg with a somewhat unfriendly gaze. If you want to break the rules, don't regret it. The other 4 black-robed men also held the weapons at their waist and slowly surrounded Abel. Rules? Meg smiled and kicked the ground. A huge axe flew up and fell into his hand. I've always been a person who follows the rules. No one can touch my people. This is the rule. Kill him, and the 250,000 will be brothers. The black-robed man waved his hand, and the other 4 black-robed men pulled out their weapons and rushed toward Meg. Meg raised his eyebrows. This scene was like a group of brass fearlessly rushing toward the king. It was awe-inspiring. Therefore, he carried the axe and sent the group of level 3 and 4 knights away like chopping chickens. When the leader of the black-robed men saw this scene, his eyes widened. He took out 3 light yellow balls and threw them on the ground. Then, he turned around and ran out. The 3 thunderballs exploded on the ground, and a few clouds of smoke rose up. In the blink of an eye, the black-robed man was outside the house. However, a 2-meter-tall giant suddenly appeared and blocked the door. The black-robed man was shocked, but he reacted quickly. He waved the long sword in his hand and cut off one of the giant's arms. Hmm? The black-robed man was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect himself to be so brave. However, although the giant lost an arm, he was still brave and rushed forward again. The black-robed man quickly waved his sword again and cut off the giant's other arm. At the same time, he stabbed the giant's heart. Then, he lifted his leg and kicked the giant over. Bah! The black-robed man spat. This was the most satisfying fight he had ever experienced. It was so satisfying. Did you experience the thrill of battle? A voice sounded from his side. Just as the black-robed man was about to nod, his expression changed. He turned around and saw a huge axe coming at him. The axe cut him in half. Such a cruel scene. Even Meg didn't dare to look back. Chapter 2109. After wiping off the fingerprints on the axe, Meg threw the axe beside the giant man and returned to the house. They. Faye choked on the smoke grenade and looked at Meg with red eyes. The smoke is too thick. They killed each other without seeing clearly. It's too cruel. I don't even dare to look. Meg waved his hand to get rid of the smoke and untied Faye's tortoiseshell. He only retied her hands and feet. There was already the sound of the door being broken and the sound of footsteps outside. Someone is here to clean the floor, so I have to go now. You just have to do as we said before, Mag said to Effie before leaping out of the window at the side. Dear, be careful. Everyone inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. After a round of self-intimidation, the people from the Yamen finally managed to break into the room where the smoke had dispersed 15 minutes later and successfully rescued the innocent citizen, Miss Faye. Shit, we fell into a trap. In the attic, Boris looked at the unusual commotion in the courtyard, and his expression changed. It is pretty bad. A cold voice came from behind him. Boris turned around and saw a beautiful woman and a beautiful little girl appear in the attic without him knowing. Who are you? Boris was shocked, but his hand was quietly holding onto the dagger at his waist. Since you asked so sincerely, we will be merciful and tell you. In order to prevent the world from being destroyed, in order to protect the peace of the world, in order to carry out love and true evil, the cute and charming Amy is me. Amy said with a serious expression as she held onto the folding chair. Huh? Boris stared. Bang! His face fell on the folding chair. Critical hit *10,000. Huh? Amy looked at Boris, who was lying on the ground, and shook her head. Father said, we have to be civilized. Boris laid on the ground with his eyes wide open. He felt like he had suffered 10,000 points of damage. Well, if you don't say anything, it means you admit it. Amy nodded. I am Boris. If you let me go, I can give you a lot of money. Boris struggled to get up from the ground. Although he looked panicked, he still looked at Irina and said, You have a lot of money? Irina looked at him and asked, Yes, I have a lot of money, a lot of money. Boris nodded repeatedly, as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. Okay, we'll go get it ourselves later. Irina nodded calmly. Huh? Boris stared. Bang! He was knocked to the ground again. I didn't scold anyone. Boris was angry and aggrieved. Are you teaching me how to do things? Amy tilted her head and looked at him. I didn't. Boris wanted to cry. Who are you? Why are you doing this? Boris said angrily. Being trapped by a woman and a child and unable to escape made him feel extremely humiliated. Boss Boris, you're so forgetful. Didn't we just meet at the wine tasting conference 2 days ago? Have you forgotten about us? Footsteps and Meg's voice came from downstairs. It's you. Boris looked at Meg, who appeared at the staircase. His eyes widened in disbelief. Yes, are you surprised? Meg looked at the bloody scars on Boris's face and smiled as he patted Amy's head. Boris was shocked. He never thought that the person who ruined his plan was Meg. How many things had this ordinary young man who only knew how to brew wine done behind the scenes? Mr. Hades, please let me go. You can state your conditions. I'll fulfill all your wishes as long as you let me leave this place safely. Boris looked at Meg and said sincerely, I want to kill the great old Lord Cthulhu. I want to destroy the undead army without suffering any injuries. I want to kill Andre Edward and his sons. Huh? See, you can't even fulfill one of my wishes. Isn't this nonsense? Meg pursed his lips and gave him a big slap. I fucking... Boris cried on the spot. Why? Why did you interfere? If the Titan Tavern collapses, your tavern business will only become better. This is a good thing for you. Boris looked at Meg in despair. Sorry, not everyone's character is as despicable as yours. Meg shook his head, then slowly bent down and looked at him with a cold smile. Also, did you know that I bought half of Romo Street? Half of it. I made money by speculating in real estate. Damn it. Boris looked at Meg in a daze, as if he had not walked out of the shadow of his failure. I'll ask you one last question. Did you have anything to do with the murder of Effie's parents? Meg looked at him and asked. Boris was stunned, then suddenly laughed. He looked at Meg with a ferocious expression and said, Do you want to know? Let me go and I'll tell you. Otherwise, you won't know for the rest of your life. Ha ha! Boris's laughter stopped abruptly. He held his throat and looked at him in horror. You? What did you feed me? I took it from your subordinate. I removed the wax on the outside, so the effect should be better. Meg smiled. Boris's face quickly turned black. He grabbed his throat with his hand and tried to make a last useless struggle. Also, your expression just now told me that Effie's parents just happened to meet a rotten person. You have nothing to do with it. Meg said indifferently. Boris stared at Meg with his eyes wide open. Finally, his legs twitched and he stopped breathing. Can you remove the bloodstains on his face so that he can pass away more naturally? Meg covered Amy's eyes with one hand and asked Irina. Irina waved her hand, and the stains left by the folding chair on Boris's face disappeared. Let's go. It's time for us to collect our reward. Meg stomped his feet, and the building that had been abandoned for many years collapsed. Boris's body just happened to roll onto the street, and Meg and his family disappeared with a burst of golden light. Miss Effie, who was rescued, cried and complained. It was heartbreaking for such a weak girl to suffer such a calamity. It really made one's heart ache. The Yaman's people couldn't bear to let her see the tragic scene outside. After taking her out of the courtyard, they asked her a few simple questions and sent her straight home. Boss, the building on the next street suddenly collapsed. It seems like someone was buried there. A Yaman runner quickly ran into the courtyard. Is there such a coincidence? Let's go and take a look. A group of people quickly arrived. Isn't this the boss of Boris Tavern? Why is he here? Someone quickly recognized Boris's identity. He died from poison. His body is still warm. He died not long ago. The leading officer let go of Boris's hand and got up to look at the half-collapsed three-story earthen building. He then looked in the direction of the courtyard, and his eyes lit up. I understand. Chapter 2110. Mag had given them enough hints to solve a case that had been a competition between the same industry, a black market hitman, and the kidnapping of a female boss that had taken them a whole day and night. However, the government office didn't seem to have anything to do with the murderers killing each other and the mastermind committing suicide to avoid punishment. They only rushed to the scene, protected it, and cleaned it up. To put it bluntly, they just want to clean up the floor. However, there was still one murderer on the run. And just before the government office sealed up Boris's house, Boris's vault was emptied. The wealth that the owner of the richest tavern in Rodu had accumulated over several decades had been wiped out. According to the relevant sources, the amount involved was in the hundreds of millions. Looks like poverty does limit one's imagination. Meg sighed as he looked at the more than $3 billion in cash and notes that had been counted in the house. Father, are all bad guys so rich? Amy looked at Meg with sparkling eyes, as if she had discovered the secret to wealth. Rich people aren't necessarily bad guys, but bad guys are usually quite rich, Meg said with a smile. Then you must bring me along to beat up bad guys in the future, Amy said with a serious expression. Okay. Meg agreed readily. It was no problem to bring Amy along to take care of these small fries, and sat alone in the corner and drew. She wasn't interested in these worldly things at all. Ugly Duckling lay on the counter and looked into the kitchen from time to time. It was thinking about its lunch that was half an hour late. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door outside. Irina waved her hand and put away all the gold, silver, and jewelry in the house. I'll go open the door. Amy skipped to the door and opened it. Outside the door stood Effie and Mara, who were carrying many things in their hands. Little Amy, this is for you. Effie handed a basket filled with all kinds of snacks to Amy. Wow, so much good food. Amy's eyes lit up. She took the basket and took a bite of the stick of candied hawthorn. Then she thanked Effie vaguely. Thank you, big sister Effie. Faye walked in and took a bolt of aqua blue satin from Mara. She walked up to Irina with a smile and said, Big sister, this is top-notch glazed satin. You have such a great figure. I'm sure it'll look great in a dress. Thank you. Irina took the satin. She did like it a little. However, although she accepted the satin, she still took another look at Effie. She called her big sister affectionately, but she didn't know if she had other intentions. I heard that Annie likes to draw, so I have some sketchbooks in my collection. I wanted to see if Annie would like them. She was rummaging through the cloth as she rummaged through the bag. Book! Mag raised an eyebrow and suddenly felt a little nervous. His hardcover Jean Ping may have flown into Faye's window. In terms of quality, it was definitely a masterpiece. However, it was too realistic and not suitable for children to read. Moreover, although Irina and the others didn't know Chinese, they always thought that Meg was the only one who knew Chinese. If Effie took out a copy of Golden Lotus here, he would definitely be beaten up. Thinking that she had already learned the secret knot technique that he had used on Camilla, he felt a chill run down his back. Just as Meg's heart was about to jump to his throat, and he was considering whether to risk his life and create an accident, Effie took out a few colorful children's books from the bag. Well, you do have some appreciation. You know to keep good things for yourself. Meg let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, and happily took the colorful picture books. It was clear that she liked these beautiful picture books very much. Thank you for the money. Meg knew the price of these beautiful picture books. If they were made by a famous artist, they would cost at least 10,000 copper coins. How could that be? As long as the children liked them. Faye smiled reservedly. Compared to the life-saving grace of Mr. Hades and his family, this small gift was nothing. Everyone received a gift. Just as Meg was thinking about what Effie would give him, she took out a bill from her pocket. I heard that my life is worth 1,000,000 copper coins on the black market. Mr. Hades saved me. This money is my thank you gift. Effie handed the bill to Meg. This money, I can't accept it. Meg quickly raised his hand to refuse. He had already obtained too much. This 1,000,000 copper coins had shaken off a huge sum of 3 billion. This money, you have to accept it. Otherwise, I will feel embarrassed. Effie didn't withdraw her hand. She looked at Meg with a firm expression. This money, I will accept it for him. Stay for dinner, we haven't eaten yet. Just as Meg was thinking about how to refuse, Irina took the bill from Effie's hand and said, Okay. Effie blurted out, but she quickly blushed and said embarrassedly, I'm here to freeload again. I'm a little embarrassed. The main reason was that Mr. Hades' food was too delicious. Her body was very honest. It's okay. The more the merrier. Amy said with a smile. Also, this way, Father will cook a few more dishes. Meg took the money from Irina and didn't say anything else. He walked towards the kitchen. You guys wait for a while. I will cook for everyone. Not long after, Meg made a table full of sumptuous dishes. Effie and Mara's mouths were slightly open. They looked at the steaming and fragrant dishes on the table, and their throats unconsciously moved. Is this the legendary eggplant with garlic sauce? Effie asked as she pointed at a dish. Yes, you know about it? Meg was a little surprised. Did Mr. Hades also read the Whole Foods magazine before learning how to make it himself? Effie looked at Mag with an astonished expression as she said, It looks exactly the same as the drawing. It's so awesome. Oh, yes, I also read it and learned it. Meg nodded with a smile. He had almost forgotten about that. However, Effie helped him cover it up perfectly. Do you like this dish? Meg asked casually. I read the magazine 2 days ago, and I even dreamed about it. It's a pity that Chaos City is too far away, and I can't leave now. Otherwise, I would definitely go and try Mr. Meg's cooking. Effie nodded with longing in her eyes. Then you are in for a treat. Father's eggplant with garlic sauce is super delicious. It's not inferior to Mr. Meg's at all, Amy said with a wink. Really? Then I will definitely try it first. Effie picked up her chopsticks and picked up a piece of eggplant. She blew on it before putting it into her mouth. The 4 flavors of sour, spicy, sweet, and salty exploded in her mouth almost at the same time. Her taste buds were stimulated in an instant without any warning, and that feeling of rushing straight to her brain was a little overwhelming. Every single flavor was so prominent, but when they blended together, they were so harmonious that she couldn't help but indulge in it. The soft eggplant almost melted in her mouth. After experiencing a crazy taste feast, she swallowed it gently, and there was still a lingering fragrance lingering between her lips and teeth. Effie's red lips parted slightly, and she couldn't help but let out a soft moan. Chapter 2111. This dish of eggplant with garlic sauce satisfied all of Effie's imaginations of eggplant with garlic sauce. No, it should be said that it was far beyond her imagination. It was already on another level. Even words were far from being able to describe that feeling. Her tongue went crazy, but she still wasn't satisfied. Effie opened her eyes. Her face was slightly red. She glanced at Meg. There was an inexplicable feeling. She lowered her head and ate a mouthful of rice, chewing the sweet rice, and then put a piece of eggplant in her mouth. If it was said that she admired Meg's winemaking skills before and was grateful to him for saving her life, then because of these 2 meals, she had a different feeling. Let's talk about these 2 meals. She really wanted to marry him. Who didn't want to wake up every morning to eat delicious soup dumplings and congee with century egg and lean meat? Who didn't want to eat eggplant with garlic sauce every day? Who didn't want to hug that beautiful body every night to sleep? Oh, she really didn't crave his body. It was just she felt very safe, understand? This eggplant with garlic sauce is too delicious. I want to cry again. Mara's eyes were filled with hot tears because she loved him deeply. As a chef, Meg enjoyed the praise from the customers. The tavern had been open for a long time. He even almost forgot this feeling. Sure enough, he still liked to be a chef. This meal, Effie was sweating profusely. She was very happy. Burp. Effie covered her mouth and smiled a little embarrassedly. And she was very, very full. She had eaten almost all of her usual food for lunch today. But at this time, the guilt couldn't compare to the satisfaction in her heart. This was a very dangerous signal. Generally at this time, it was time to become fat. Mr. Hades, I think that opening a tavern might be a waste of your talent. Effie looked at Meg and sincerely said, Your cooking skills are not inferior to your winemaking skills. It's amazing. It's admirable. It can't be helped. A person's energy is limited. Sometimes you have to make a choice. Meg sighed. He could only open a tavern for a period of time, then a restaurant for a period of time. That's really a pity. AI Faye also sighed, feeling that it was a pity that the others couldn't taste Meg's cooking. The Yaman didn't make things difficult for you, did they? Meg put down the bowl and asked. Yes, all the procedures went very smoothly because the murderer was executed on the spot. Moreover, it is said that the mastermind committed suicide by taking poison 1 street away. AI Faye nodded and said with some lingering fear, It's Boris, the owner of Boris Tavern. I didn't expect it to be him. That was a true big shot in the tavern world of Rodu, and she didn't think that he would attack her. However, she couldn't help but think of Mr. Hades and his family when she heard that Boris's house was burglarized. But she had no proof. Of course, she wouldn't say a word about this to anyone. Mr. Hades and his family had risked so much to save her and Mara. That was enough for her to remember. Even if she used her entire life to repay such kindness, wouldn't be enough. Then we'll take our leave now. The workers are still repairing the damaged site. I have to go and take a look. AI Faye and Mara helped to clear the table before taking their leave. Why did you take her money? Meg closed the door and looked at Irina with curiosity. Only an idiot would pass up money. Irina smiled. Meg didn't believe her and continued to look at her. You still don't understand women. This 1 million is to buy her life. It's also to return a favor to us. If you don't take this money, she won't feel comfortable in front of us in the future. That's how women are, Irina said with a smile. I see. Meg nodded thoughtfully. He indeed didn't understand women very well, but he had always been in the circle of women. In his previous life, it was because he was rich. In this life, he was rich, talented, and fucking powerful. He didn't have money and wasn't talented enough, so he had to understand women. And no matter how much he understood women, he could just be a spare tire. The matter was settled, and the money was in his hands. Meg closed the shop and went upstairs to take a nap. Then, he went to retrieve the bamboo tube buried under the locust tree at the end of the street. Michael sent a piece of good news. Under the pressure of the great old ones and Meg's threat, the demons in the boundless sea realm finally came to an agreement and decided to join the peace alliance and sign a new peace treaty. The Roth Empire bowed, the demons compromised, and the orcs were no longer a threat. The trolls, who were sitting on the wall, immediately expressed their stance and joined the peace alliance. This was how the trolls survived. They weren't a weak race, but they always liked to be fence-sitters. The various races had already agreed to send representatives to Chaos City 3 days later to sign a new peace treaty and form an alliance to resist the undead army. The specific matters would be discussed on the spot, including sending the Allied army up north to stop the undead army from going south and eliminating the great old ones, Cthulhu. We seem to have done something that will be recorded in history. Meg passed the letter to Irina with a smile. Irina looked at the letter with a smile on her face. She looked at Meg and said, if the Norland continent can survive this disaster, it might become different. Meg nodded with a smile. It was hard for him to disagree with Irina. Once the alliance was formed, the various races would inevitably have to cooperate more deeply for this war. For example, when the allied army of the various races entered the Roth Empire, the dwarves would have to provide weapons for the allied army. The goblins would be responsible for logistics, and the giant dragons would be in charge of aerial attacks. Meg felt his blood boiling, just thinking about the scene of multiple races working together. How's the situation with the elves? Meg suddenly remembered that he hadn't cared about the elves and the night-elf situation for a long time, and this letter didn't express the elves' attitude. I raided Elliot's old nest yesterday, released all the serfs and slaves, and brought them back to Chaos City, Irina said. You killed him? Meg asked. No, his life belonged to Shirley. I wouldn't kill him. Irina shook her head. Meg nodded. Elliot was Sally's father, but he killed Shirley's father. This hatred couldn't be resolved. The elven race is in a state of chaos right now. I don't know what Helena is thinking. With her personality, there's no way that she would allow the situation to continue to worsen. Irina's brows furrowed in confusion. Maybe she's plotting something, or maybe she feels that the situation is hopeless and doesn't want to struggle anymore. Meg stroked his chin. He couldn't understand the current situation in the wind forest either. Chapter 21:12. Mr. Hades' cooking is really too delicious. Mara followed behind AI Faye and smacked her lips as if she hadn't had enough. Little girl, you only know how to eat and eat. Sooner or later, you'll be abducted. AI Faye reached out her finger and poked her nose as she snappily laughed. It would be great if Mr. Hades abducted me. Mara nodded her head. You are hopeless. AI Faye rolled her eyes and turned to enter the tavern. She couldn't help but think, if Mr. Hades wanted to abduct her, should she accept it or pretend to be reserved first? The damage to the tavern wasn't too serious. The smashed door had already been pulled away. AI Faye ordered a custom-made iron door from the blacksmith and at the same time reinforced the door frame and installed pulleys. Although opening and closing the door took a bit of effort, it wasn't that easy to break it open from the outside. After replacing a few tables and chairs and repairing the ground that was smashed by the axe, the outside of the tavern was almost finished. However, AI Faye still had to find a blacksmith to make a new one for the damaged wine cellar. She also had to spend a sum of money to hire a magician to install a new magic barrier. Miss, You really have great foresight. This wine cellar saved our lives. Mara looked at the 2 deep axe marks on the cellar door and somewhat rejoiced. Yes, just a little bit. AI Faye also nodded with lingering fear. If it wasn't for the magic barrier and this specially made cellar door, she wasn't sure if they could wait until Mr. Hades arrived. Miss, is Mr. Hades very powerful? Mara suddenly asked. No, he is very lucky. A man who can cook, his luck won't be bad. AI Faye smiled and shook her head. So it's like that. Mara thoughtfully nodded. That's right, Mr. Hades should be super powerful. AI Faye thought. Even Mara saw some clues. How could she not feel anything at all? Mr. Hades appeared at the critical moment, subdued the ferocious and terrifying thug, and took him to explore the tiger's den. Although the people at the yamen said that the thug died due to internal strife, she didn't think so. Mr. Hades must have played a very important role in it. She knew that there was only one thug in the case, and the other one was played by Mr. Hades. Of course, none of this was important. She would pretend that she didn't know anything. She just had to remember that Mr. Hades saved her and Mara. Is there anything else we can give Mr. Hades tonight? Mara looked at AI Faye again and swallowed her saliva with a smile. Mr. Hades' cooking is really delicious. Why don't I send you there? AI Faye rolled her eyes. Really? Mara looked at AI Faye with a serious expression. It's time to work. What are you thinking about all day long in that little head of yours? AI Faye reached out and hit her with a chestnut. This was something that even she didn't dare to think about. Twilight Forest. In the Black Castle of the August tribe. Oster, who had a black iron hook attached to his right arm, sat on the main seat. He looked at the dozens of Orc tribe leaders in the hall and unhappily said, "Where are the people from the Lynx tribe?" "Chief, the Lynx and Mutt tribes have already joined the Peace Alliance 2 days ago. They didn't send anyone to attend the meeting today." A subordinate at the side whispered into his ear. "Oomph, a bunch of spineless cowards." Oster slammed the table angrily. There was silence in the hall. The leaders of the various tribes had different expressions, and no one made a sound at that moment. The news of the devils appearing in the far northern ice field and gathering the terrifying undead army had been spread for 2 to 3 days. All the leaders of the various tribes had heard about it. The reason why Oster had gathered them here today was also related to this matter. After the Roth Empire's invasion, the War Tribe Alliance, led by the August tribe, suffered a great loss in power. The Fok tribe took the opportunity to persuade the other tribes and successfully divided a group of tribes to join them. Because of this, there were only 40 to 50 tribes left in the War Tribe Alliance. They were not as powerful as before. Oster stood up and said to the various chiefs in the hall, "You should have heard about the recent events. The devils and the undead army are now in the north of the Roth Empire. If they go south, the Roth Empire will definitely be attacked. This is the best chance for us to take revenge. The Roth Empire ambushed our tribe and killed our tribesmen and brothers. Our hatred is irreconcilable. Yet, Chaos City is hypocritically asking us to sign a peace treaty and even sending troops to help Chaos City resist the devils. What right do they have? To hell with the peace treaty. We want revenge." The resentment in the various chiefs' chests was ignited, and they scolded angrily. Oster curled his lips and continued, "We orcs will never give in. But now, that little bitch from a Fok tribe wants to lead those cowards to surrender and agree to those humiliating treaties. Do you agree?" "No, orcs will never give in." All the chiefs stood up and roared angrily. "Great." Oster looked at all of them with satisfaction and nodded. "I knew all of you are real men of flesh and blood. I asked all of you to come here today, not to discuss how to side with the Roth Empire, but to discuss joining forces to attack the Fok tribe and kill Connie, who killed her father and her traitorous daughter." All the chiefs' expressions changed when they heard that. Connie's authority in the Twilight Forest was not below Oster's at all. Furthermore, she had the hairless monk to protect her. Oster had tried to kill her time and time again, but he had failed every time. "I have already asked her to meet here tomorrow to discuss the peace treaty. The hairless monk will definitely come along. All of you will lie in ambush inside and outside the hall." I will smash the cup as the signal. Everyone will attack together and kill the two of them on the spot." Oster looked at everyone with a sly smile. Brilliant. Although all the chiefs despised Oster for using such a despicable scheme to deal with a little girl, they still flattered him. After that, Oster discussed the details of the ambush with all the chiefs and made all the necessary preparations to ensure that Connie and Rex would not be able to escape. Only then did he let everyone leave. Great. I want to see how this little bitch is going to escape this time. Oster laughed to the sky. He had not been so carefree in a long time. As long as he regained control of the Twilight Forest, he would be able to conquer the world when the demons and the undead army went south and the Allied forces suffered heavy losses. That night, Oster went to bed early after eating and drinking to his heart's content. He also placed the black iron hook that was custom-made by the dwarf blacksmith at the head of the bed. Suddenly, a petite figure landed silently on the roof, and a cold gleam pierced through the darkness. Chapter 21:13. The petite figure descended from the sky like a ghost. The sharp dagger in her hand glowed coldly, and her target was clearly Oster, who was lying on the bed. Although he was in a deep sleep, his alertness as a 10th-level powerhouse still made Oster open his eyes instantly. He wanted to raise his right hand instinctively, but realized that he had already lost his entire right arm. His left hand quickly grabbed the large knife beside the bed and slashed upwards. However, it was too late for him to make a move because of his momentary mistake. The petite black figure tossed the dagger in her hand. A cold gleam flashed and sank into the heart of Oster, who was struggling to get up. The petite figure tiptoed and landed lightly on the bed. The other dagger in her left hand had already pierced into Oster's neck. You. Oster covered his neck and glared at Connie, who had lit up a beast oil lamp and removed her veil. I hung in your room for an entire day so that I wouldn't get lost. Wasn't it tough? Connie smiled as she looked at the two daggers on Oster's chest and neck. She nodded in satisfaction. Master won't scold me now. Oster sat up slowly and grabbed the large knife beside the bed again. He glared at Connie angrily. Stop struggling. I've smeared poison on the dagger. It's about time for it to take effect, Connie said calmly. Oster felt a sharp pain in his chest, and all the energy in his body seemed to have been sucked out in an instant. He couldn't hold the large knife anymore and fell from the bed. Impossible. Oster sprawled on the ground weakly and looked up at Connie with a ferocious expression. Even her father couldn't defeat him. How could a little girl like her? He couldn't accept this. You don't know how much I've suffered to kill you. Connie extended her hand and smiled as she showed off her calloused palm and the black dagger that she was holding again. Oster widened his eyes and watched as the dagger pierced through his forehead. Then he fell backward with his head raised. Although I've thought a lot of lines, my master once said that villains die because they talk too much. Not being arrogant is the basic quality of an assassin. Connie looked away and threw the oil lamp in his hand onto the quilt beside him. The flames began to burn fiercely, but her figure once again disappeared into the darkness. Fire! Fire! It's the clan leader's room. Put out the fire. Patriarch was killed. How could this be? Someone come quickly. There was an assassin. Catch the assassin. The flames soared to a height of over 10 meters. The news of Oster's death spread quickly, and the entire August tribe fell into a state of panic. The chiefs of the various tribes looked at the rising flames with dumbfounded expressions. Today, he was still listening to Oster talk about how to kill Connie tomorrow. Now he was suddenly killed. Enemy attack. A sharp horn sounded from the direction of the wall, but quickly stopped. Countless torches suddenly appeared in the darkness. The drawbridge was cut down, the city gates were opened, and countless orc warriors swarmed into the August tribe. The August tribe's soldiers on the city walls were disarmed before they could resist. The entire tribe was quickly occupied. Thousands of orcs surrounded Oster's mansion. The elders and chiefs of the August tribe were completely flustered. They hid in their manors and didn't dare to come out. They only recovered from their shock now. They thought they were the hunters But they only realized now that they were the prey that had already entered the trap. Connie rode a white unicorn forward. He cleared his throat and said, "The people inside, listen up. I am the chief of the Fok tribe, Connie. Oster was extremely violent and cowardly. I carried out God's will and sacrificed him to the heavens. You are now surrounded by the strongest and most elite orc army in the Twilight Forest, but I will give you a chance to disarm, surrender, and submit to the Peace Alliance. Put down your weapons, come out with your hands on your head, and voluntarily join the Peace Alliance. I will give you a chance to turn over a new leaf. Those who try to resist, I will send you and Oster to the heavens together." At this moment, everyone looked at this young chief and was moved. Yes, this was the aura of a leader. She was soft but firm. Her petite body had an aura that made people submit to her. Rex was riding on a unicorn behind Connie, a gratified smile on his lips. God knew how many times she had made him rehearse this. Not long later, dozens of chiefs lined up with their hands on their heads and came out of their manors to sign the Peace Alliance Treaty of the Orc tribes. Oster was dead, and he died in the hands of Connie. This meant that the supreme power in the Twilight Forest had officially changed. After tonight, there would only be Connie's voice in the Twilight Forest. After a short internal conflict in the August tribe, a new chief was elected and signed the Peace Alliance Treaty on behalf of the August tribe. Connie sat on the horse and looked down at those orc chiefs as he coldly said, "Tomorrow, the Fok tribe will hold the first Peace Alliance Treaty of the orc tribes. I hope to see each and every one of you there." His petite body had an irresistible deterrent force. All the chiefs nodded in agreement. Connie then looked at the new chief and elders of the August tribe and coldly said, "The August tribe will be temporarily taken over until I confirm that Oster's influence has been completely removed. I advise everyone not to have any dissatisfaction. The only result of resorting to violence is death." The new chief lowered his head and answered with a trembling voice, "Yes." All the elders also lowered their heads. Although they were aggrieved, they didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction. That's all. Connie waved his hand. A team of orcs entered Oster's mansion and began to take over the August tribe. Connie and Oster also entered the mansion. Connie saw that there was no one around and turned to ask Rex with a smile, "Master, how was my performance just now?" "Not bad." Rex nodded slightly. "I think it's very cool." Connie pursed his lips. He wasn't very satisfied with Rex's comment. "How many strikes did you use to kill Oster?" "3 strikes," Connie answered casually. He then added, "I saw that he was talking too much, so I gave him another strike." "You ambushed him for an entire day, and you even used 3 strikes to kill a cripple. I'm a little disappointed in you." "Wow. Even if he was crippled, he was still a 10th tier cripple." Connie glared. "Then, how about the fact that you got lost and couldn't find your room, and I had to bring you there in the end?" I wasn't lost. I just couldn't find my way." "Master, look, the moon is so round today. I wonder if Barbara has returned to the moon. I'll get her to bring me some moonstones." Connie tapped his finger lightly in front of him as he looked around. Rex sighed. Why did I take in such a directionless killer disciple? Chapter 2114. Chaos City. Amy's. Light shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Yabamia, Barbara, Raina, Gina, Shirley, Anna, and the other children who stayed behind were sitting around the dining table, enjoying their hot pot. The grill at the side was filled with kebabs. Speaking of which, Boss and the rest have been gone for almost 2 weeks, right? I wonder when they will be back, Yabamia lamented as she dipped a piece of tripe into the pot. Boss said he was going to go out and play for a month before he left. I think he will be gone for another half a month. Shirley chewed on a raw cucumber to ease the numbness in her lips. Phyllis poured the potato chips in her hand into the pot and smilingly said, "Speaking of which, I really miss Boss's delicious food. I already have a feeling that when Boss comes back, I will definitely eat and drink like a pig for a few days to make up for the weight loss." Hannah pondered seriously. "Oh yes. Hannah, how's your brewery now?" Mia asked. "It's pretty good. The production has already started, and the first batch of wine will be ready next month." Hannah nodded. Barbara took 2 kebabs from the grill and then seriously said to everyone, "Everyone, please cherish the delicacies in front of you. I feel that the Norland continent is quite dangerous now. If the situation gets worse, let's go back to the moon together." Did something big happen? Shirley slowly put down the cucumber in her hand and looked at Babla with a serious expression. Everyone also looked at Barbara. She had been helping out at the city lord's castle recently and had taken time out to come back for a meal with them today. Some scary fellows appeared in the north of the Roth Empire. I might have to leave Chaos City in a few days' time. I don't know how long I will be gone. Barbara nodded. She quickly smiled and said, "But don't worry too much. It will definitely be resolved. After all the races on the Norland continent are going to form an alliance soon." The ladies didn't know much about these things. Camilla, who knew a little, wasn't in Chaos City at the moment. However, after hearing Barbara's words, he still paid attention to it. Recently, people have been coming to the ice cream shop every day to ask when the boss will be back and when the restaurant will be open again. By the way, is there any way we can contact the boss? Yabamiya changed the topic. Well, not really. The boss is such a heartless man. He took the 2 babies out to play and left us at home, Angela said with some hidden bitterness. Everyone laughed, and the atmosphere suddenly became relaxed and cheerful. Achoo! When Meg closed the door of the tavern, he sneezed. Do gods catch colds too? Meg rubbed his nose and muttered softly, "Maybe someone is talking bad about you behind your back." Irina took a bottle of red wine and 2 goblets and looked at Meg with a smile. "I'm such a good person. I don't think anyone would scold me." Meg walked over with a smile and took the red wine from Irina's hand. He kissed her cheek gently and asked, "Are the children asleep?" And is still painting. I told her to go to bed early. Amy was tired from playing in the day, so she fell asleep after taking a shower. Irina nodded with a blush. Seems like it's going to be another inseparable night. Meg poured the red wine into the decanter. The scarlet red wine swirled slightly and was as intoxicating as the night. What would Mr. Hades and the rest be doing in this moonlit night? Effie sat by the window and pulled open a corner of the curtains. She looked at the room diagonally opposite with the curtains drawn and the faint light shining in. She was in a daze. Oh, right. They have children, so they should be coaxing them to sleep now. And they went out today and did so many things. They even had to open the restaurant to entertain guests at night. They must be tired and sleepy. After taking a shower, they didn't want to move at all and immediately fell asleep. Effie thought about it, and her eyes fell on the book that was peeking out from under the blanket. She looked back at Mara, who was fast asleep on the small bed, and then reached out to take out the Golden Lotus book. Mara was frightened yesterday, so she let her sleep in her room today. Effie quietly flipped through the beautiful scrolls. Her face was slightly red, but she couldn't help but think of Mr. Hades. "Effie, you're such a terrible woman." After a long time, Effie put the book back under the blanket and closed the curtains with a dazed look in her eyes. The next morning, Mag made breakfast and took out a basket of field snails from the fridge to process them. Amy was the first to come downstairs. She looked at Meg, who was removing the tail of the river snail, and asked curiously, "Father, what's this?" "This is a river snail, an ingredient." Meg introduced with a smile and handed one to Amy. Amy put it in her mouth and took a bite. She frowned and looked at the river snail with 2 bite marks in her hand. She shook her head and said, "It's not good. It hasn't been processed yet." "Of course it's not good." Meg took the river snail back from Amy's hand with a smile. He cut off the fat head fish in his hand and removed the river snail's tail. "But shell is so hard. Will it soften after cooking?" Amy moved a small stool and took a soup dumpling from the pot. Then she sat in front of Meg and took small bites of the dumpling as she asked, "No, the river snail's shell can't be eaten. We can only eat its meat." Meg pointed to a river snail in the basin that was attached to the edge of the basin. "Look, the meat is inside the shell. That's the soft part. It looks like a snail." Amy leaned forward and stared at it with sparkling eyes. Then she quickly looked up at Meg. "Is that snail edible? I saw a lot of them in the backyard yesterday." Snails. Meg's first reaction was to shake his head. But after thinking about it, French snails were a famous French dish. It would be wrong to say that they were inedible, but strangely, he could accept the spicy river snails by the roadside, but he could not accept the French snails served on the table in a Western restaurant, even though they did look somewhat similar. Some snails are edible, but the ones in our backyard are inedible. Meg smiled and said, "If that wishing well is lying to you that those snails are edible, let's fill up the well." He was more worried about waking up tomorrow morning to a big pot of snail soup on the table. That scene, just thinking about it, was terrifying. So he directly blocked the mouth of Amy's nameless system to prevent it from issuing strange quests. "I see." Amy nodded and then asked curiously, "Then what kind of snails are edible?" New side quest issued. The snail seeking knowledge. Please find an edible snail and cook it into food. The system's voice sounded in Amy's mind. Chapter 21:15. This, Meg really didn't know how to describe it. Snails came in all shapes and sizes. They looked similar, but there were also many that were very different. However, it was a good thing that Amy had a thirst for knowledge. As a father, he had to satisfy her curiosity. "System, I need some strange knowledge," Meg said in his mind. "There are many types of snails, and most of them are poisonous and inedible. The types of snails that can be eaten on Earth, such as the French snail, garden snail, and agate snail, do not exist on the northern continent. The shell of the French snail is round and thick. The surface is yellowish-brown and shiny, and there are many dark brown bands." After the system's explanation, there's more strange knowledge. Meg absorbed a little before he began to relay it to Amy. Amy listened carefully. After a while, she asked, "So the poisonous snails can't be eaten and the non-poisonous snails can be eaten? I'll give the snail to Ugly Duckling first. If Ugly Duckling is fine, then it's a non-poisonous snail that can be eaten, right?" Ugly Duckling, who was squatting at the side and staring at the soup dumplings on Amy's plate, widened its eyes. It quickly stood up and slowly backed away. "There's something wrong with you. It sounds reasonable, but it's not like that." Meg shook his head with a smile. "There's a big difference between not dying after eating it and being able to cook it into a delicious dish. For example, we won't die after eating the leaves of the big tree outside the door, but those leaves can't be used as ingredients to make delicious food." Amy listened attentively. "It's the same for snails. They might not be poisonous, but their texture is terrible or they have a taste that's hard to swallow. Such snails can't be called edible snails," Meg continued. "I see." Amy nodded thoughtfully. She took a bite of the soup dumpling and was a little troubled. "Then where am I going to find edible snails?" Meg looked at Amy with a slight frown on his face, but he quickly smoothed it out again. He knew that the little one must have received a new mission from the system, and it must have something to do with finding edible snails. This is really a system that has too much time on its hands. Meg complained in his heart. Then he asked in his heart, "System, I want to order a French snail." "No." The system replied quickly and cleanly. "Other edible snails are fine too," Meg continued. "Host, please do not attempt to interfere with missions issued by other systems. This is not beneficial to the system's training of the host," the system warned. "I'm helping Amy train her system. There's no such thing as being trained by the system," Meg said leisurely. "Please be a human. Just tell me if you're selling or not. I have plenty of money today. As long as it's an edible snail, I'll buy it for you without hesitation for 100 copper coins each," Meg said generously. "Host, you have not obtained a right to use this ingredient. Please continue to work hard, or add a little more," the system said seriously. 101, no more, Meg said decisively. "As long as it's edible, it's 101 copper coins each, right?" the system confirmed. "Yes." Ding. 101 copper coins have been successfully deducted. "Host, please go to the backyard immediately. There's a yellowish-brown snail at the root of the third osmanthus tree. It's non-toxic and edible," the system said cheerfully. "Fuck." Meg's expression froze. He had just vowed that the snail in the backyard was absolutely inedible, and now he was going to take Amy to the backyard to find an edible snail? This slap in the face came like a tornado, and he couldn't get used to it for a while. He even suspected that the system had purposely placed the snail in the backyard. Solemn reminder to the host. That's a live snail, and it's moving slowly. If the snail disappears because the host is too late to catch it, it has nothing to do with the system reminded. Father, do you know? Amy looked at Meg for help, her big, cute eyes staring at him. Okay, I can't refuse. Meg sighed in his heart. He put down the knife in his hand, stood up, and said with a smile, let's go to the backyard first. Maybe there'll be some there. Amy finished the soup in a shallow plate, but didn't move. She looked up at Meg in confusion. But didn't you just say that the snail in the backyard was definitely inedible? Meg's expression was slightly awkward. Sure enough, sometimes one couldn't be too sure of one's words. However, Meg quickly regained his smile and calmness. He nodded slightly and said, yes, I think I was too careless just now. I should check the site to be sure. Maybe there's a new snail today. Is that so? Father is really strict. Amy nodded. She reached out and grabbed 2 of Amy's fingers and happily followed Meg to the backyard. The backyard of the tavern was not big. It was just a small flower bed. A few days ago, Irina had remodeled it. She added a thermal magic shield and planted some flowers. The original 3 osmanthus trees were preserved. As soon as he opened the door, the fragrance of the flowers wafted out. It was refreshing. The temperature was comfortable, and there were flowers and plants. Naturally, there were all kinds of insects and small animals. As soon as Meg went out, he saw 3 small snails hanging in the damp corner of the wall. There! Amy also noticed the 3 snails. She quickly squatted down and observed them for a while, then looked back at Meg. Father, they all look edible. They clearly don't match the characteristics I just described. Okay. Meg walked forward and looked at the 3 ordinary snails. They were frighteningly slippery. He quickly shook his head. No, they can't be eaten. Let's look again. They usually hide in the roots. Okay, then I'll let you go for now, Amy said to the 3 snails. Then, she ran to the 3 osmanthus trees and carefully searched. This. Meg had already noticed that there was a huge yellowish-brown snail at the base of the 3rd osmanthus tree. It was about the size of an adult's palm and had a translucent yellowish-brown color. It was round and resembled a conch. Wow, what a big snail. Amy also noticed the snail. She trotted over and squatted down. The snail seemed to have sensed danger. It turned and frantically climbed up the tree trunk. Trying to run, Amy slapped it down. The snail retracted all its tentacles back into its shell. Father, can this snail be eaten? Amy held the big snail in her hands and looked at Meg expectantly. This was the biggest snail she had ever seen. Yes, this should be an edible snail. Meg nodded. This snail looked similar to the French snail in both its size and appearance. It must be the snail that the system had mentioned. This is a cow snail. Its meat is sour and poisonous. It can't be eaten. Irina appeared at the door and leaned lazily against the door frame. She looked at the snail in Amy's hands and said, Chapter 21:16. Meg and Amy turned around at the same time and looked at Irina in surprise. It can't be eaten? Such a big snail must have a lot of meat. Amy looked at the big snail in her hand with a look of pity. It can't be eaten? Meg's expression was a little stiff. After all, he had just said that this was an edible snail, but now he was being denied by Irina. But after all, Irina was an elf, so she definitely knew more about small animals than he did. Under the 3rd tree, the system should be talking about this snail. Could it be that the system was trying to cheat him of his money? You can try, Irina said to Meg with a smile. That won't be necessary. Meg was not interested in snails, and if the meat was sour, then it would be even worse. Just imagining the taste made him feel nauseous. What a pity. Amy casually threw the big snail into the snow outside the yard. She had already seen the places where it had crawled on the tree, leaving behind mucus that had corroded the bark. Then, Mother, what kind of snails are edible? Amy asked Irina curiously. There are thousands of types of snails in the wind forest, but most of them are inedible. Some of them are highly poisonous, but there are also some that are edible. After cooking, they have a pretty good taste. Irina walked around the yard as she spoke, and finally stopped under the third osmanthus tree. She bent down and picked up a small gray snail from the bottom of the trunk. Here, this is a limestone snail. Although it looks ordinary, it is actually very nutritious. We just need to break off its shell and bite off its head to eat it directly. Wow, an edible snail? I found it. Amy happily took the snail from Irina's phone, so it was hidden under the tree. Meg suddenly realized that the system was not lying to him, but he had preconceived that the snail from before was the target. But, looking at the coin-sized snail in Amy's hand, it was not much bigger than a field snail. Wait a minute. Meg reached out to stop Amy, who was about to bite off the snail's head. As a father, he really could not sit back and watch Amy eat the snail raw. Father, do you want to eat it too? Amy looked up at Meg and hesitated for a moment, then smiled and handed the snail in her hand to him. Here. Meg was touched by such a filial scene between a father and a daughter. But he still rejected the snail and shook his head with a smile and said, You can eat this snail, but we don't have to eat it. Look, it's all alone in the snow. It's so pitiful, it's all alone. Put it all. For a moment, Meg could not find a reason to reject her. Raw snails don't taste good. We elves only eat raw snails when we're hungry. Irina took the snail from Amy's hand and put it back on the tree. Meg raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. Sure enough, he still needed a dignified mother. How can one be enough? Next time when we go back to the forest, I'll take you to catch more. You can eat to your heart's content, Irina said with a smile as she patted Amy's head. Okay. Amy immediately nodded happily. Meg felt that he had made a mistake. Okay, since you're all up, let's have breakfast first, Meg said, then turned and went into the house, and had already come downstairs, and she was still holding the new picture album that she had drawn overnight last night. It was still the story of the mermaid. The previous one had been taken away by Shishi, so this child had drawn it again. I didn't expect the previous one to be so good. There's still room for improvement. Meg flipped through it and was a little surprised. The content had not changed much, but the style had become more mature, and the details were almost perfect. It was like an exquisite work of art. In's talent in drawing and the advantages of being a tentacle monster were perfectly displayed. If it were another cartoonist, even if they were given a month, they would not be able to draw such a perfect picture book, let alone one night. In smiled shyly and did not say anything, but it was obvious that she was very happy. After breakfast, Meg continued to deal with the snails. Is this a water snail? Irina asked curiously as she stood at the side with a cup of water and looked at the snail in front of Meg. No, this is a snail, not a snail. Meg sternly corrected the snail's name. If it was a snail, he really would not be able to suck it. I think it's more or less the same. It's all the same shell with circles of whorls. Irina did not think much of it. But this is indeed not a snail. If the snail was stir-fried with chili, it would taste very good. Meg finished peeling the last of the snails, then carefully washed them with clean water several times to make sure that all the dirt had been washed away. The well-peeled snail just happened to reach the innards. After washing it a few times with clean water, it was clean. Only with such a snail could he boldly suck it with ease. The clean snails were placed in the fridge. It was not a good time to eat snails in the morning, and he had to go out for a while. Before Meg could go out, there was a knock on the door. Meg opened the door. It was the intermediary, and Tip was here. Hello, Mr. Hades. I hope I'm not disturbing you by coming to see you so early. Fitch stood outside the door and looked at Meg with a face full of smiles. Ever since he had seen through Mr. Hades' scheme, his admiration for Mr. Hades was like a torrential river flowing endlessly. In the past few days, there had been an endless stream of customers who had come to inquire about shop rentals, and the door of the intermediary agency had almost been trampled to pieces. Fitch held the power of attorney for half of the shops on Romo Street, and this was the first time he had experienced what it felt like to have power in his hands. Even his boss had invited him to his house, but he had declined with the excuse that he was too busy with work. He really was too busy. Every day, he would take customers to look at the shops until late into the night. He had already received no less than 100 letters of intent, many of which were from famous shops in Rodu. It was quite clear that under the influence of the twin stars of the Titan Tavern and Saipan Tavern, a new high-level business district was brewing, and he was going to be a participant in history. This made him very excited. "That's all right, I was just about to go out. What's the matter?" Meg nodded slightly as he looked at Fitch. Fitch hurriedly said, "It's like this. You asked me to review the qualifications of the merchants who want to rent shops, and I've already received 108 letters of intent, many of which are very capable merchants. Also, they have all offered decent rental rates, so I wanted to talk to you and see if I could confirm some of the merchants." Chapter 21:17. Only 108. Meg's expression was calm, but he was a little surprised inside. He didn't expect so many businesses to come knocking on his door in just 2 or 3 days. Indeed, businessmen had a very keen sense of smell. They could smell business opportunities immediately. As expected of Mr. Hades, 108 is still far below his expectations. Could it be that he has a bigger blueprint? Fitch was in awe. He was still feeling smug about the results of the past 2 days, but he didn't think that it would be enough to catch Mr. Hades' eye. It is a little low, but not many people know about the news in the past 2 days. In a few days, there will definitely be more, Fitch explained with a smile. Meg nodded. Once the news spread, more people would come. He looked at Fitch and said, "How about this? Leave the information here, and I'll see if there are any suitable businesses. I'll let you know later." "All right, then I won't disturb you. If you need anything, you can find me at any time." Fitch handed over the information with both hands, and then left quickly. Meg liked this kind of young man who did things well and didn't drag things out. After putting the information on the wine cabinet, Meg went to the talent market in the south of the city. The tavern was on the right track now, and the lack of manpower was the biggest problem. Amy could be the cashier and take orders and could help serve the dishes. He didn't dare to count on Irina, but he still felt too busy with multiple jobs. How should he put it? It was just that there was no happiness in work. This was a very bad experience. As a man with money, talent, and power, he actually had to put up with work. This was too out of character for him. However, he had overestimated the talent market in Rodu. The weather was cold, and so was the talent market. There were only a few recruitment agencies open, not to mention high-quality service staff. Meg walked around and returned disappointed. "How about we ask Phyllis and the others to come over?" Irina looked at the troubled Meg and said, "They should be free now anyway." "No, we have to go back in half a month. Mamie's is our base camp." Meg shook his head. It would be comfortable for the time being, but it would be troublesome in half a month. Saipan Tavern was different from the previous lobster restaurant. Meg bought half of the street so that it could continue to operate and earn profits. "Big sister Effie has a lot of girls. Why don't you ask her to introduce you?" Amy, who was playing on the side, suddenly asked. "All right." Meg's eyes lit up. He had forgotten about AI Faye, the lady boss who had been in business for many years. "Amy, go invite Effie and Sister Mara over for lunch," Meg said to Amy. "All right." Amy put ugly duckling down before skipping out of the room. Soon, Amy knocked on the door of Titan Tavern. Effie, who didn't sleep well the night before, rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around before noticing Amy standing at the door. She was a little surprised as she asked, "What's the matter, Xiao AI?" "Big sister Effie, Father invited you and Big sister Mara to our place for lunch," Amy said obediently. "Mr. Hades is inviting us to lunch?" Effie's eyes lit up, and she immediately sobered up. However, in order to appear more reserved, she prepared to decline. "Really? We can go for lunch at noon too." Mara had already run out from behind with a surprised expression. She nodded and said, "All right, we'll definitely go." "Thank you, Xiao AI." Effie took a look at Mara and could only nod with a resigned smile. "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Hades." "Sure, I'm going back now." Amy nodded and turned to go home. "Wait, Xiao AI, don't you like to eat desserts? A friend gave me some pastries yesterday. I'll get some for you." Effie called out to Amy and went in. Soon, she came out with a small bamboo basket filled with all kinds of food. "Thank you, Big Sister Effie." Amy held a biscuit in her mouth and walked away happily with the basket. Mara looked at Effie and said, "Miss, do you want to go back to sleep?" "Sleep my ass. Hurry up and get changed." Effie patted Mara's head with a smile and turned to go in. "Miss, why do you keep hitting me for no reason recently?" Mara scratched her head and closed the door with a puzzled expression. "Mara, why do you think Mr. Hades invited us to lunch? Maybe he cooked too much and can't finish it. He hasn't even started cooking yet. Then does Miss think that the way we eat is more appetizing?" Meg made a grilled fish, then stir-fried a few dishes. Finally, he served 2 plates of stir-fried screws, and a table full of dishes was ready. What a big fish! Mara saw the grilled fish on the grill as soon as she walked in and swallowed her saliva. She and the young miss had never eaten such a big fish before. "We're just here for a meal." "Miss Effie, you don't have to be so polite every time," Meg said as he looked at the kitchen utensils in Effie's hands. "I bought this before, but Mara and I don't eat so much. But it's just right for Mr. Hades and your family." Effie handed the kitchen utensils to Meg with a smile. "That's okay. We can eat together in the future." Amy washed her hands and climbed onto her high stool with a smile. Effie smiled. Children's words carried no harm, but she couldn't help but glance in Meg's direction. "Yes, we can get together more in the future. It's convenient for neighbors," Meg said with a smile and let Effie and Mara sit down. Effie greeted Irina and before sitting down with Mara, "Is this grilled fish the same as the grilled fish at Mamie's?" Mara asked Meg curiously. "Mara knows about Mamie's grilled fish?" Meg looked at Mara with surprise. "She likes to read gourmet magazines. Maybe she saw it from somewhere," Effie explained. "Yes. Mamie's grilled fish is also grilled like this." "Mr. Hades, have you eaten at Mamie's before?" Mara's eyes were filled with envy. Meg nodded. "Yes. I've stayed in Chaos City for a while before, and I've tried almost all the delicacies at Mamie's, so I learned how to make some." "Wow, you're so awesome." Mara looked at Meg with admiration. Mamie's was a holy place in her heart. Not only had Mr. Hades been there, he had even learned how to make the dishes. "Then try my grilled fish and see if it meets your expectations of Mamie's," Meg said with a smile as he picked up a piece of fish for her with the serving chopsticks. Effie looked at the fish in Mara's bowl with envy. Chapter 21:18. AI Faye understood that women who acted spoiled had the best lives. However, Mr. Hades didn't seem to buy it. After all, his wife was sitting across from him, so she couldn't do anything. Mara picked up the fish in the bowl. It seemed like it would break if she used a little force, but it didn't fall apart and was very elastic. The red sauce perfectly wrapped the fish, and the spicy taste assaulted her senses. She couldn't help but drool before putting it into her mouth. After a moment of hesitation, she slowly put it into her mouth. The slightly charred fish skin wrapped the fresh fish meat. The spicy taste blossomed on the tip of her tongue. That kind of soul-shaking feeling made her unable to control herself for a long time. Her imagination? Oh, that was too lacking. This was a delicacy that she couldn't even imagine. The spicy feeling made her feel a little hot, and the fresh fish meat brought her into another world. It was as if she had jumped into a pool on a hot summer day. There was a clear and refreshing feeling. She couldn't understand how the charred fish skin and the fresh fish meat appeared at the same time. The spicy taste didn't cover up the freshness of the fish meat at all. Instead, it raised the taste to another level. "It's too delicious. Mr. Hades, please take me as your disciple. I want to learn how to cook from you." Mara put down her chopsticks and looked at Meg with admiration. Her expression was quite sincere. Meg was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Mara's first reaction after eating the grilled fish would be to take him as her disciple. Mara. Faye also looked at Mara with some surprise. This girl, was she looking for an excuse to freeload? Mara also realized that her behavior was a little too reckless. Her little face blushed, and she stuttered a little. I just think that Mr. Hades' cooking is too delicious. It's the best food I've ever eaten in my life, so you want to learn?" Meg smiled. "Yes." Mara hurriedly nodded, her eyes full of light. Meg shook his head slightly. "That depends on whether your young mistress agrees or not. It also depends on whether you have the talent to learn how to cook." Young mistress. Mara turned to look at AI Faye with a serious expression. If I learn how to cook, I can cook for you. AI Faye seriously thought for a second and nodded. Okay, I agree. There was no other reason. She just wanted to eat. Mara usually cooked at home, but her cooking skills were average. She couldn't be blamed for this. She had grown up with AI Faye, and her culinary skills were all taught by AI Faye. To be able to reach an average level was already considered an existence with extraordinary talent. After all, AI Faye's cooking was something that even she didn't dare taste. If she could learn how to cook from Mr. Hades, even if she only learned a little, their meals would definitely be greatly improved. After all, freeloading was not a long-term solution. Before she married into this family, she had to be more practical. Mara was learning how to cook from Mr. Hades. As a parent, it was reasonable for her to come over often for free meals. Wonderful. AI Faye looked at Mara with admiration. In order to create more opportunities for her, Mara really put in a lot of effort. After getting Effie's approval, Mara looked at Meg again. Seeing AI Faye nod, Meg smiled and said, "All right, since Miss AI Faye has agreed, then I'll test your talent after we eat. If you pass, then you can learn how to cook." Okay, thank you. Mara nodded excitedly. Irina looked at Meg, but didn't express her opinion on this matter. Let's continue eating, Meg said. He had already picked up a snail and put it in his mouth. His lips held the snail, and his chi entered his dantian. Then, when the snail wasn't paying attention, he quickly took a bite. The snail meat came out of the shell along with the spicy soup and fell into his mouth. The spicy soup, coupled with the springy snail meat, was fresh and spicy. It had an extremely wonderful taste. Then, he drank a mouthful of cold beer. This feeling was simply too wonderful for words. This was a clear water snail. It didn't have a trace of mud, and it didn't have any sand. The snail was cut just right, so there was no need to be careful about eating the intestines. You just need to focus on sucking and leave the rest to a miracle. Meg sucked in 5 snails in one breath. Then, he ate a piece of spicy cucumber and drank a mouthful of cold beer. Only then did he stop, carefree. He looked at the stir-fried snails in front of him with satisfaction. This was a top-grade dish that went well with alcohol. Meg's actions stunned everyone at the table. They even forgot to move their chopsticks. Amy copied Meg's actions and put a snail into her mouth. She sucked on it like candy for a while. When it was almost tasteless, she spat it out. She looked at Meg with a puzzled expression. "Father, is eating this snail just to lick it? This is a snail, not a snail." Meg corrected her. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he remembered that this was their first time eating this dish, so he continued to introduce, "The snail eats the snail meat, and the snail meat is hidden in this hard shell. We have to suck it out. There's a technique to sucking snails. It's best for beginner contestants to get started. Pick up a snail like me, then put the mouth of the snail in front of your mouth. Then, lean forward and suck hard on the snail's mouth. The meat inside will naturally come out. After you've mastered it, you could be like me. Put the snail directly into your mouth and use your flexible tongue to adjust the direction of the snail. Then, suck gently to suck the meat out and spit out the shell. So that's how it is." AI Faye nodded thoughtfully. It seemed that Mr. Hades' tongue was very flexible and good at sucking things. Then, some indescribable images appeared in her mind, and her face turned red. Irina also looked at Meg meaningfully. So, this was how he trained his tongue? She knew best whether it was flexible or not. Amy, who was the most practical foodie, had already picked up a new snail. She imitated Meg, put it to her mouth, and sucked hard. Her eyes lit up. She chewed the meat in her mouth and swallowed it. Then, she looked at Meg in surprise. "I sucked it out. Snails are so delicious." "Yes, very talented." Meg nodded with a smile. In this aspect, Amy was definitely a genius. "Miss, what's wrong?" Mara picked up a snail and was about to give it a try. Seeing AI Faye's red face, she asked curiously. "Maybe I'm a little drunk." AI Faye took a sip from the cup beside her. "But you're drinking water?" Mara was even more surprised. "Today's water is a little drunk." AI Faye glared at her and motioned for her to eat quickly. Mara held the snail and tried several times, but in the end, she still failed. Why is my mouth leaking air? Mara looked at the snail in her hand that had been sucked dry, but the meat didn't move at all. She was discouraged. Some people are like this. You don't have to force it. Actually, you can use a toothpick to suck the meat out. Meg took a box of toothpicks from the side and put it in front of Mara. Of course, using a toothpick to eat a snail was equivalent to not having a soul. Chapter 2119. Spicy field snails with cucumbers added to them were refreshing and greasy. It was Meg's favorite. This spicy and refreshing field snail, paired with the cold beer, was getting more and more intoxicating. AI Faye obviously couldn't eat spicy food. Although she was drinking water, she couldn't help but sigh. Meg poured her a large glass of beer and threw 2 pieces of ice inside. Is this the new beer you brewed? AI Faye looked at the bubbling golden liquid in front of her. The refreshing aroma of the beer hit her face and looked at Meg with some surprise. No, this is the beer I bought from Mamie's. The owner of Mamie's and I have a good relationship, so I bought a barrel and brought it back to drink. Meg casually replied. Beer? AI Faye whispered. The spicy feeling on her lips was too strong. She couldn't help but take a sip of the beer. When the frosty cold beer entered her mouth, it was like a basin of ice water was poured on a raging fire. She could almost hear the sound of the fire extinguishing. The spicy feeling was immediately extinguished. That kind of heart-penetrating cool feeling shook her spirit. It was too pleasant, moreover. After drinking the beer, there was still a faint fragrance left in her mouth. However, it quickly dissipated and was refreshing and pleasant. This beer, it's so good. AI Faye looked at the beer in front of her and couldn't help but praise. The golden color was clear and transparent. Pure white foam hung on the glass wall. It looked elegant and unique. She took another sip of the beer. This time, she didn't rush to swallow it. Instead, she carefully savored it. The taste of the beer was refreshing and mellow. The quality of the beer was cold, and the body was harmonious and soft. It had a strong killing power. After entering the throat, there was a delicate bitter taste. It was weak and slightly pleasant. This medium degree of control made people want to slap the table and praise. Good beer. AI Faye put down the glass and seriously looked at the beer in front of her. Although it wasn't hard liquor, the beer still had a taste that made people sigh in admiration. If she participated in the wine tasting conference, she might even win a gold medal. It's a good beer. Meg smiled and nodded. How could the beer he brewed not be good? Although the lunch was sumptuous, everyone still had a light meal. Effie and Mara helped to clear the table. Meg called Mara to the kitchen and began to test her. How do you test your cooking talent? AI Faye curiously stood at the kitchen door, wondering if she could join in. Maybe she just lacked a good master. Since you are so interested in Mamie's, you must know how to make eggplant with garlic sauce, right? Meg looked at Mara and asked. Yes, I've already memorized the recipe. Mara nodded. But I haven't cooked it myself yet. Meg took out a few ingredients from the fridge and put them on the cutting table. He said, now I have all the ingredients here. Just make me a dish of eggplant with garlic sauce according to your understanding. Do you want me to cook it directly? Mara was a little surprised that the test was asking her to cook eggplant with garlic sauce. Yes, it's useless to memorize the recipe. You have to make it to know how much you've mastered. Meg nodded. After teaching her how to start the fire, he stood aside with his hands behind his back. Mara looked in the direction of the door for help. AI Faye clenched her fist and cheered her on. Then she left. Without any backup, Mara looked away, took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to recall the recipe of eggplant with garlic sauce. Then, she began to wash her hands and prepare the ingredients. Meg stood aside and watched without saying a word. Other than being a little nervous, Mara's movements were clean and neat. However, he didn't know which terrible master she had learned her cooking skills from. Her cooking skills couldn't be more wild. When she held the kitchen knife, it felt like she was holding a guillotine. The eggplant was chopped into pieces of different sizes. Mara must have realized that these pieces were too different, so she deliberately refined them, causing the difference in size to become even bigger. Mag sighed softly in his heart. Just this basic skill alone was going to take him a lot of time to train him. Then, Mara began to cook. She heated the wok, added oil, and put in the bean paste. The cooking process surprised Meg. Mara's performance was much better than he had expected. Whether it was the timing of putting the ingredients into the wok or the control of the seasoning, everything was done well. There was a world of difference between her knife skills and his. Looks like I've been misled. Meg looked thoughtfully at Mara, who turned off the heat and took the eggplant with garlic sauce out of the wok. Mara held the plate of eggplant with garlic sauce with both hands. Aside from the uneven size, everything else was decent. She looked at Meg expectantly. Would you like to try it? There's no need to try it. My hands were a little shaky when I put in the seasoning. The salt was a little too strong. I didn't stir-fry it in time, so there was a burnt smell. The uneven size of the eggplant made the texture uneven, and it was difficult to get the flavor in, Meg said calmly. Mara's expectant expression instantly froze. She pursed her lips, and her eyes reddened. She held back her tears. Has Mr. Hades always been so strict? AI Faye had already smelled the aroma. She thought Mara would definitely succeed. She didn't expect Meg to say that she had no strong points. No, he's usually very gentle with the girls. Amy shook her head. Is that so? Irina looked at Meg with a half-smile. Do you think I still have a chance? Mara held back her tears and said with some grievance. Meg smiled and shook his head. No, you've been hired. Mara's eyes widened. She looked at Meg with her mouth slightly open. She couldn't believe it. But I'm curious. Did you learn your cooking from the executioner at the market? Why is your cooking style so bold? Meg looked at Mara curiously. I followed. Mara looked at the door. AI Faye, who was happy for Mara, changed her expression slightly. She looked at Irina with a slightly embarrassed expression. I suddenly remembered that I have something to do. Thank you for the sumptuous lunch. I'll be leaving first. Okay, goodbye. Irina nodded slightly. Mara left quickly with a red face. If Mr. Hades knew that her cooking skills were so bad, it would be too embarrassing. Mara looked away and shook her head. I learned it from the butcher at the market. I'm not an executioner. Meg smiled. He roughly knew who Mara's cooking skills came from. But, can I really learn how to cook from you? Mara still couldn't believe it. Yes, but before you learn how to cook, you have to learn knife skills first. Meg took out a pile of potatoes and carrots from the fridge. He casually took a kitchen knife from the knife rack. With a flick of his wrist, the kitchen knife flew in the air. A minute later, Meg retrieved the potato. The potato skin fell off, and a charmingly naive little bear appeared. It looked just like ugly duckling that was sleeping on the counter. Wow, that's amazing. Mara's eyes widened as if she had discovered a new continent. This was the first time she knew that a kitchen knife could be used like this. Good knife skills start with cooking. Today, we'll start with slicing. Look at the way I hold the knife. Chapter 21:20. It was not an easy task to teach a disciple who had no foundation in knife skills, or was completely led astray. Fortunately, Mara had a good understanding and was very motivated. Plus, Meg had a golden finger to help her. After an afternoon of practice, Mara was able to cut potatoes into thin slices of uniform size. Not bad. I'll give you this cleaver. Practice your cutting skills at home when you have time. Meg nodded with satisfaction at the sight of Mara slowly but steadily slicing a potato. Really? Master, this knife is for me? Mara looked at Meg with surprise. Although this kitchen knife was square, it was much better than the one she had at home. After spending an afternoon with Meg, Mara had already changed her address to Master after getting Meg's approval. Of course. Meg nodded with a smile. Let's call it a day. We'll go back after dinner. Okay. Mara nodded. After thinking for a while, she hesitated and said, Then, my Miss Effie, she doesn't know how to cook. Mara nodded. Then you go and ask her to come over for dinner. Meg smiled. He also remembered that he was busy teaching Mara at noon and forgot to ask Effie to recommend waiters. Okay, thank you, Master. Mara smiled and put all the potato slices into a basin. Master said that they could be used to make mashed potatoes and potato cakes. Are you going to ask Mara to cook dishes with wine in the future? Irina looked at Mara, who trotted out, and turned to Meg, who was wearing an apron and preparing to cook. Yes, this child is very talented in cooking and is very enthusiastic. I'm going to teach her to cook a few dishes with wine to maintain the competitiveness of Saipan Tavern. Meg nodded. However, he was directly poaching Effie's staff. Whether he could succeed or not depended on Effie's attitude. He couldn't do it by force. Miss, Master asked me to call you to dinner. Mara ran back to the tavern and shouted loudly. Before she saw anyone, she smelled a burnt smell coming from the kitchen, accompanied by smoke. Is it on fire? Miss, are you all right? Mara rushed to the kitchen and kicked the kitchen door open. Then, she saw Eiffel with a spatula in his hand and a face full of soot. His eyes were red from the smoke as he turned around. Inside the pot, there was a black, indescribable object that was emitting scorched smoke. Mara was stunned. She coughed a few times as she choked on the smoke. Only then did she come back to her senses. She hurriedly ran to the water tank at the side and scooped a spoonful of water into the pot to cool down the indescribable object that had been burned to ashes. She then opened the kitchen window to let the smoke out. After doing all this, Mara pulled Effie out of the kitchen and looked at Effie with a puzzled expression. Miss, what's wrong with you? Could it be that you want to burn charcoal by yourself? Go to hell. Effie's face flushed red. Fortunately, there was a layer of soot on the outside, so it couldn't be seen. He turned his head away and lowered his voice. I just wanted to cook. From the looks of it, it doesn't look like you were cooking. If I came back a little later, the neighbors would have rushed in to put out the fire. Mara shook her head seriously. If I say so, then so be it. Effie waved the spatula in his hand and looked at Mara. You learn how to cook? Mara pulled out a kitchen knife with a whoosh. W.H., what are you doing? Rebelling? Effie looked at the knife in Mara's hand and then looked at the spatula in his hand. He became a little unconfident. No, this is the kitchen knife that Master gave me. Mara smiled and shook her head. She even waved it in the air. It's very useful. Effie was a little surprised. Master? Mr. Hades accepted you as his disciple? Yes, Mr. Hades agreed to let me call him Master. Today is the first time I learned that a kitchen knife can be used like this. Mara nodded with a face full of happiness. Effie's face was full of envy, but he still curled his lips and said, Isn't it just cooking? I could do it too. You are setting fire. Mara corrected him. Damn, girl, your wings have hardened. Effie raised the spatula in his hand. No, my miss is the best. Master told me to call Miss to eat. Let's go wash our face and change our clothes first. Mara quickly said, Did Mr. Hades specially tell you to call me to eat? Effie's movement stopped, and there was a bit of joy in his eyes. No, I was worried that you would be hungry at home, so I specially told Master. Mara shook her head honestly. Humph. Effie snorted, but she still put down the spatula in her hand and went upstairs to change her clothes and wash her face. Effie changed her clothes, washed her face, and put on some light makeup before bringing Mara to Saipan Tavern. During dinner, Meg looked at Effie and asked, Miss Effie, we are new here and we want to recruit a few waiters, but we haven't found any suitable candidates. Do you know anyone? Mr. Hades wants to recruit waiters? Effie looked at Meg and understood after thinking for a moment. Saipan Tavern's business was booming now, and Mr. Hades' family obviously couldn't handle it alone. The Titan Tavern had 8 waiters, and she felt a little overwhelmed these 2 days, so she planned to recruit 2 more waiters. What kind of waiters do you want to recruit? How much is the salary? Effie asked. They have to be nimble and generous, and it would be best if they are slightly younger. In terms of salary, it should be about 5,000 copper coins a month. Of course, if they are good enough, you can increase it, Meg said. Meg didn't expect to be able to wait for service staff to come knocking on his door like he did in Chaos City. He just wanted to be able to use them immediately. Effie pondered for a moment and said, I do know a few of them. How about this? Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I can ask them to come to your tavern, and you can talk to them in person. Thank you very much. Meg's eyes lit up. He had found a right person. After dinner, Effie and Mara bade farewell. It was time for the Titan Tavern to open for business. After exiting the Saipan Tavern, Mara looked at Ify with a puzzled expression and asked, "Young mistress, didn't you make an appointment with those waiters yourself?" Ify shook her head with a smile and said, "Mr. Hades has more manpower than us. He has helped us so much, so this is nothing." "Oh," Mara nodded. After thinking for a while, she said, "In that case, I will go and help Master." Ify turned to look at Mara with a hint of a smile and said, "Why? You want to run away from me so soon?" No pop-up window. Chapter 21:21. Titan Tavern was robbed by thugs, and its owner, Ify, was kidnapped. After a night of terror, the news spread in the tavern circle. Fortunately, after the Titan Tavern closed for a day, it immediately resumed business. The lady boss's complexion also looked good, which made the drinkers breathe a sigh of relief. "It's good that Miss Ify is fine. I didn't sleep the night before when I heard the news. I was worried that something might have happened to you." Marcus looked at Ify with relief. "I'm sorry to have worried you, President." Ify smiled and poured wine for the organizers of the wine association. Fergus said indignantly, "Boris is such a scumbag. To think that we thought he was promoting the development of the winemaking industry and gave him the silver award." The others at the same table had similar expressions. When the news that Boris was the murderer spread, everyone did not quite believe it. It was not until several of Boris's taverns were closed and the news of his suicide was confirmed that the news spread in the circle. Ify's background was pitiful enough. Her parents died in a robbery. Boris did not hesitate to hire thugs to do the same thing to Ify in order to seize the Titan liquor formula and let the nightmare repeat itself. Fortunately, Ify was blessed by the heavens and turned the misfortune into a blessing. The murderer was punished. Ify smiled and drank a glass of wine with everyone before she went to work. She knew that it was not because she was blessed by the heavens, but because she happened to meet Mr. Hades. After the opening hours, Meg cleared the last few customers out. He was about to close the door when he saw she standing outside. Meg looked at her and thought for a while before saying, "Do you want to come in for a drink?" "Okay." She's answer was still cold and straightforward. She walked past Meg and entered the tavern. Irina had already cleaned up the tavern with magic, and Amy had fallen asleep on the chair behind the counter with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Annie had just taken out her paintbrush and sketchbook from under the counter and was about to start her work for the night. "She wants to drink some wine," Meg explained to Irina. "What would you like to drink?" Irina looked at she and asked. She was like a lady boss serving customers. "Mao Tai," she said. Irina took a bottle of Mao Tai from the wine cabinet and gently waved her hand before it landed on the table in front of she. "Thank you." She sat down and said, but her eyes fell on Annie subconsciously hugged the sketchbook in her arms tightly. She was instinctively afraid. "And go upstairs and draw first, but you have to go to bed early tonight." Meg took a step forward and blocked she's line of sight. He smiled and said to Anne. Annie nodded obediently and ran upstairs with the sketchbook and brushes in her arms. "What would you like to order?" Meg turned to look at she and asked with a smile. He knew that she meant no harm to Anne. Otherwise, she would not have given him the ring. Judging from the current situation, the Ancient One had yet to show up to take Anne away, so his impression of she was still at the guest stage. Moreover, she had saved their lives back in the ice field, so it was only right for them to make a few dishes to go with the wine. She glanced at the menu on the wall and said calmly, "I'll take all of them." That's an adult's willful words. Meg raised his eyebrows, but did not reject Faye's request. He was ready to go into the kitchen to cook. That, she's voice rang again. Meg stopped and was a little surprised by she's calm tone. For the first time, there was a strange fluctuation in his voice. She still looked indifferent and said, "Red braised pork. Do you know how to make it?" "Red braised pork? I do." Meg nodded and looked at she strangely. It seemed that Anne's comic skills were good enough to make she mention red braised pork. She's eyes showed a hint of surprise, but she quickly hid it. She pondered for a while and said, "Then add a helping of red braised pork." "Red braised pork? That'll take a while," Meg said. Red braised pork was not difficult to make, but it needed time to stew slowly. It was not a dish that could be served casually. "It's okay. I have time," she said calmly. "But I want to sleep." Meg frowned. She was stunned and looked at Meg. "This guy wants to reject me? How about this? Give me a battleship in exchange for a helping of red braised pork," Meg said in a negotiating tone. "Impossible," she said coldly without thinking. This human was delusional. He wanted to use a portion of food to exchange for the most advanced battleship of the ancients. "Then a main cannon is fine too. The one that repelled Cthulhu in one shot." Meg lowered his request. She just looked at him quietly and did not even bother to say a word. "I don't want an electromagnetic cannon. Even a normal main cannon will do." Meg did not want to give up. After all, this was a reward that the system would not give him. The technological level of the ancients was far beyond the Norland continent and Earth. Any main cannon would be a direct combat force against the undead army. "You're a human knight, and she's a sorcerer. Even if you get the main cannon, you won't be able to use it," she said. "Then you're underestimating me. Isn't it just a cannon? Who are you looking down on?" Meg pursed his lips. Irina rolled her eyes and blushed. No one knew what she was thinking. "I've said that the existence of the ancients must be hidden from others. Do you think it's reasonable for a battleship's main cannon to appear in this world?" She looked at Meg and asked. Meg said seriously, "Any powerful attack made by the powerhouses is reasonable. At most, I'll carry it on my shoulder as a personal weapon. That's very reasonable." She frowned as if she could not imagine that scene. The undead army is a lifeless existence. They have no fear or fear of death. However, even if the various races of the Norland continent form an alliance, the warriors who go to the north to stop the undead army from going south have families behind them. If they die on the battlefield, it won't be a simple number, but a broken family. If possible, I want to increase the strength of the alliance. Even if it's just killing more undead, maybe the alliance will have fewer warriors dying, Meg said seriously. She looked at Meg with respect for the first time, but she still said coldly, "I want to taste it first and see if the braised pork is worth a main cannon." "Okay, please wait a moment." Meg's eyes lit up as he turned and walked into the kitchen. When she nodded, he knew there was a chance for the main cannon tonight. He wanted a powerful single combat weapon, but he also needed a tempting bait. "I was persuaded by him." She frowned and felt like she had stepped into a trap. "Are you a god?" Irina sat down in front of her and looked in her eyes. Chapter 21-22. She looked at Irina. She was a young and beautiful elf with astonishing talent. She had already reached the pinnacle of power on the Norland continent. Among all the major races on the Norland continent, she had the best impression of the elves. They were beautiful, kind-hearted, and yearned for freedom. They had a high affinity with nature and were very cohesive. Oh, yes, this was a record left behind by the observer more than 100 years ago. After her observation during this period of time, the truth did not seem to be so. The wind forest, which was known as the last pure land on the Norland continent, was a mess. The inferior hierarchy of humans prevailed among the elves. She even saw elven slaves who were ordered around like cattle. These experiences overturned her impression of the elves. She pitied the elves who were treated as slaves, but her good impression of this race was almost gone. This beautiful elf in front of her did not belong to the oppressed elven class. She should be a ruling class existence. "I'm not a god." She shook her head slightly. "Are you here to save this world?" Irina continued to ask. That day on the ice field, that huge glowing object had launched an attack that shocked her. Even Cthulhu was forced to retreat. "I'm not here to save the world. I have no obligation to do so." She still shook her head. "You should know that I'm his wife, so I know everything." Irina smiled and crossed one leg. "Since your target is also Cthulhu, then you're here to save the world. Only the truly powerful can save the world. We can't." Meg, who was cutting pork in the kitchen, was enraptured. When it came to flattery, Irina was indeed better than him. She heard Irina's words and frowned slightly, as if she was in deep thought. "This is your business," she said. Irina shook her head with a smile. "No, the fact that you're here and have contact and cooperation with us, what you think of as inferior beings, means that this is not just our business. She sat up slightly and looked at the elf in front of her seriously for the first time. Irina stopped smiling and said in a low voice, "You may have come from the heavens, or you may have come from the earth. It doesn't matter to us, just like those gods who leave traces but will never truly appear. What we want is a world where we can survive, even if this world has boundaries and limits. So, we can continue to stay in this world that isn't too rich, but you have to let us live, even if it's just to reseal those guys." She looked at Irina in silence for a long time before saying, "I'm the limit of what the Ancient One can do for this world, and I have to make sure that I don't expose the existence of the Ancient One. According to the requirements, you shouldn't be in this world anymore, or you shouldn't have this memory in this conversation. If you are the limit of the Ancient Ones, then you can only choose to cooperate with us." Irina leaned back in her chair and smiled. "I admit that you're my only choice." She nodded. She re-evaluated Irina in her heart. Talking to this woman was more oppressive than talking to Meg. However, this also meant that they were indeed good partners. She did not like to work with fools. If the Ancient One can't send people, perhaps you can provide weapons and rearm the various races of the Northern continent. Let us fight a proxy war against Cthulhu and the devils, Meg said to She as he came out of the kitchen with a few cold dishes. Proxy war. She frowned. This was a new term for her. However, Meg had already explained in advance that the Ancient One could provide weapons to arm the various races of the Northern continent. This is not a decision I can make. She shook her head. Meg said with a serious face, "I hope that the Ancient One can assess the risk of the various races of the Northern continent giving up resistance and eventually becoming the devil's servants. You should know that a temporary alliance is not reliable. Moreover, there is a deep hatred between them. I will pass on your suggestion." She looked at Meg and nodded. "Please enjoy." Meg put down the dishes and helped She open the lid of the Maudai. He did not have high hopes for She's promise. After all, this was indeed not a decision she could make. As for what kind of position the Northern continent had in the hearts of the Ancient One, he could only test it out. She drank and ate in silence. Irina took a wine glass for herself, poured a glass of wine, and sat opposite her to drink. Mag glanced at Irina and wanted to say something, but stopped himself. After 3 glasses, Irina started to get drunk. She squinted at She and asked with a smile, "What is the life of the Ancient One like? Do you have to eat, sleep, and beat Lil P? Who is Lil P? Why do you beat him?" She put down her chopsticks and asked Irina seriously. "It's Lil P. Everyone beats him, so we beat him," Irina said with a smile. "We don't beat Lil P over there." She shook her head. They did eat and sleep, but it seemed that they lacked an interesting sport. "Then do you fly when you go out?" Irina asked again. "Or do you use the teleportation portal?" "We choose the means of transportation depending on the distance, but the teleportation portal has been eliminated." Meg listened to the conversation between the 2 women in the kitchen and could not help but marvel at how women could talk about anything, even if one of them was drunk. He knew that Irina was most likely trying to get She drunk and get her talk. However, she was someone who could walk out of the tavern on her own after drinking a bottle of Maudai and a bottle of whiskey. With Irina's alcohol tolerance of 3 glasses, there was no way they could compete with her. Not long after, she looked at the drunk Irina, who was lying on the table and calmly eating drunkard's peanuts. At this moment, a strong, meaty aroma wafted from the kitchen. "It smells so good." She stopped what she was doing and looked in the direction of the kitchen in surprise. This rich, meaty aroma was so tempting that she could not help but swallow her saliva. This was an aroma that was beyond her knowledge. It was also an aroma that she had never smelled in the underground city. Only Buddha jumps over the wall could compare to this. However, compared to the aroma of Buddha jumps over the wall that was intertwined with various delicacies, this aroma was pure. It was the aroma of meat. She had already imagined the scene of braised pork being cooked in a pot to a bright red color. At this moment, she was like a mermaid who had just woken up from her bed and was attracted by the sudden aroma. So the picture album wasn't a lie. She picked up the glass and took a sip to calm her nerves. She could not help but look forward to it. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.